Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 17 of the VonDubCast. My guest today is Justin Vedress. He was a guy that was from Peace River. He went to Lister at the UofA. He's the same age as my sister. He lived on 2 floors away from her in the first year, and then there's both of their second year. They lived together on 3 Kelsey and Kelsey Tower. I moved in the year after that, so their third year, and I lived on 6 Kelsey and was very close with their old floor 3K, and we came in, and Courtney had kind of introduced me to him a couple times over the years when I'd come out and visit, and he always struck me as one of the nicest guys. Definitely had that small town feel. I could tell right away, and that's something like we talked about on this podcast. When you're going to a big city like that, you kind of search out something that feels comfortable, and definitely feeling that that small town comfortability and the politeness and just the aura of niceness that rolls off of many people from a small town. But then it's especially concentrated in certain people. I like to designate these people. Every time people ask me about kind people, I have a list of 20 or 30 people that have just never heard them say a bad word, and they just are very pure of heart, and something that I quite value, and I like to keep those people around me. And Justin's definitely one of those. He's just shirt off his back, whatever you need, always willing to help. But with the cutting wit that doesn't let it get too annoying, he's definitely going to, help you out with everything you need, and then drop a bomb on you, make you laugh your ass off at you maybe taking yourself too seriously or whatever it is. He's just a really awesome guy, and someone that definitely helped me when I first got to university, and helped me walk through some of the navigations that are a little scary when you're on your own for the first time. And I really appreciated that and all he had done. And then we were lucky enough to both become executives for the Lister Dodgeball League in my second year, his third year, or his fourth year actually. And we really bonded there and got to know each other a lot more. And we were very similar, and we would argue and butt heads a lot, but we get to places. And that was another one of those people that kind of showed me how to disagree with people in the right way, and how to make it productive, and how to make it so that even when times get tough and you're at each other's throats, you can still swing that into making it productive, and bringing things back to baseline when you need to, and just having that forgiveness, and just knowing that at the end of the day, I know he's just one of the nicest guys. And even if we got upset at each other, and he knows that about me, that I love him like a brother, and I would never do anything. And just now to reconnect after not talking to him for a little while, and just to hear how far on this journey he's come, and just it's so amazing. And then now to hear that he's expecting a kid with his beautiful young bride, who is just as amazing as Justin. Just so happy to see such a nice person find another person like that, of the same caliber and the same moral fiber almost, and just to know just how good of a father. And I feel really creepy talking about it to Justin. I even mentioned this a couple times, but the amount of times me and my sister have both talked about Justin specifically becoming a father one day, and just what an amazing job he's going to do, because he's just in so many ways he ticks all the boxes for exactly what a kid would need in a father. That the sternness, but the kindness, and just very steady in the values, and always going to look up for, or stick up for the little guy, and those kind of things. So when we found out just a couple weeks ago that they were expecting, it was just I got very emotional, if I'm honest with you guys, and I was almost crying just hearing about that, even though I hadn't talked to him in depth for quite a few years here. So all of that was really nice to connect on. I know I definitely wanted to talk about it more, but like you say, with these conversations, they kind of go where they go, and we just kind of caught it at the end to bring it on. But I really enjoyed the conversation. We had actually recorded this August 23rd, and with the rate, everything's changing in the public. Just have a little bit of understanding that this was recorded a little while ago. We talked about some a little bit more tough subjects. I don't think we said anything bad, and I think we would back up everything we say, and they were all coming from a place of love and compassion. But just have that understanding that things do change very quickly, and this was recorded a couple weeks back. So not a couple weeks, but a good week. A little bit over a week ago, so things have changed. And just to keep that in mind, like I said, we're both really good people, and we are not trying to hurt any feelings. But if you hear something on here that you think is insensitive, or there's a piece missing, we're both very, very much people that like to change our ideas, and see our ideas change when tested with better ideas. So yeah, if you want to send that our way, we would love to hear more about where we are missing some things, where our blind spots are, and we would definitely both I feel like I can speak for Justin saying that we would both be very willing to take that on ourselves. So yeah, very excited for this episode. I think you guys are really going to like it. I got some really good ones coming. Did my first in-person interview just after Justin's, I think a couple days after it, and it was a very scary process. I think I even talked to Justin about being a little bit afraid of it coming up, maybe I talked about it on a podcast after. But yeah, no, definitely that's something you guys will be hearing, and I'm very excited for that guest. Alex McKendry, he's a local guy in Grand Prairie here, and he was lucky enough to play some high level hockey and even got a couple games up in the show, and had a pretty cool career, and just won another one, just like Justin, just salt of the earth, amazing gentleman that I could spend hours chatting with. So I was really happy that he, was willing to come by the house and give me his time. And I was just almost puked on nervousness, but it was something that I've put off for a long time. And I knew that these in-person interviews is something that I eventually would want to get to, and I couldn't believe how much nicer it is to be able to pass a conversation back and forth when you're in the same room and not over a Skype connection with that small delay. So I'm really going to try and double down and make sure that I, at least once a month or something, get an in-person interview, and maybe I gotta, figure out some sort of camera, get someone to help me come in and add a video feature too, and throw just maybe 1 month up on YouTube too, so people can watch the process, because I know that's something I really enjoy with the podcast. I like to be able to watch them if it's a good one and a good guest that I know, and be able to see the body language and all of that goes into a conversation apart from just the verbal. So yeah, lots of exciting things coming down the pipe, and I'm still enjoying this so much. And the only reason I get to enjoy this is because of you listeners that are giving it wings. So again, thank you so much. What else haven't I just? Again, social media. Like I said every time, I'm not a big social media guy, but it is very important for the cause. So if you could go on my Twitter and the Instagram, the VonDubCast, and follow those, that'd be awesome. I'm trying to make them really interesting follows and keep up the positivity, and not let any of the negative stuff. Just put up really cool recommendations and make it something that is worthwhile for you guys. So yeah, check that out, and I really hope you guys enjoy this episode. Talk to you at the end. All right, welcome everybody. My guest today is Justin Vedress. He's one of my good buddies from school. He had lived on the same floor as my sister in their first year. So when I came in as the young gun, the following year, maybe it was 2 years later, maybe it was second year. Anyways, I come in and I had been told by Courtney that I would really get along good with Justin. We might fight a bit, but he really took me under his wing and helped me transition. He had gone through the same process, coming from a smaller town into the big city, coming, being a big wheel, playing hockey and learning the ropes. So I really appreciate that. And hopefully I can return the favor at least a little bit with a good conversation here tonight. So thanks for being here, Justin.
Thanks so much, Nikki. Yeah, I was thinking back. I mean, that's what, now 8-9 years ago.
Yeah.
Crazy how time flies, but thanks for having me on. It's tough keeping in touch these days with a number of different distractions and other responsibilities. So really appreciate you reaching out to shoot the shit for a little while. And hey, if it helps drive your podcast business, then bonus.
Yeah, exactly. It's just that's exactly what I've been saying with lots of these. It's more so just nice to get caught up. Even if we didn't record it, it'd be lots of fun. It's just an added bonus that it gets to be for something I love like this. So yeah, I think maybe starting off would be good to tell the first story. I'd met you probably in passing a couple times, just coming and visiting the floors. But the first night, it was maybe a week into university, and you had texted me early that morning. It was just the first week of classes, so I was just going through syllabus week, and I still didn't really know anybody. And you texted me and said, "Hey, what are you doing Thursday or something?" And I don't know, nothing. You said, "Well, come to Duke's, which is across the way from Lister." And it was you and all the boys, all the dirt shooters, all the real fun party guys from the couple years ahead of me. And I was probably the only first year there, and just got immediately, jumped into the boat races and the drinking. And as I walk up to the bar that day, because I think I had some classes, I mean, you guys were already getting started.
More bite incidents than other dog breeds.
Are we talking dog breeds? I hear some dog breeds. I just heard a video about dog breeds pop up. All good. Anyways, I'm walking towards Duke's, and I just see this gang of probably 12 fully naked dudes come flying out the door right in front of me as I go to walk in and start booking it around the building. And I'm like, what is going on here? And I walk in, and you just, come in, grab a beer, and then all these guys, Oh my goodness, I couldn't believe it. It was just my first experience walking into Duke's with just about 14 dicks flying past me, going mock chicken going around, and oh man, it was fun. And just it was such a nice way to get just head first right into the shenanigans instead of kind of the scary. It says like jumping into the waters. If you tow yourself in down the steps, it's a lot colder, and just jumping right in. So that was a huge thing that you did for me, and I really appreciated it. Man, I'm really good friends with a lot of those guys to this day, and it all started with just that nice actor reaching out and inviting me out with the big boys for the first time.
Well, when was what year did you graduate from high school?
2012.
2012. So you would have came
In your third
in
year.
my third year, right?
Yeah.
Right, because for my first year of I didn't know Courtney very well at all. Obviously, I knew of her, and I think she kind of knew of me. More so just because of our small town northern Alberta backgrounds. When I heard there was someone from Slave Lake up on 5 Kelsey, you can't help but try and get to know them a little bit. But
Yeah.
Let's just say that despite all of our common interests, 5 Kelsey and 3 Kelsey for some reason didn't quite get along. I don't quite know what, looking back, can't really even put my finger on what that reason would have been, because
There's so many old rivalries in there.
but yeah, second year Court and I lived. It's always funny telling these stories to people that maybe haven't ever lived in residence. Because I was just about to say, yeah, I lived with Courtney in my second year, and that probably would raise some eyebrows, around a large number of populations. But when there's 40 other people on the floor. Anyway, yeah, we lived together in second year. We got really close. Really, one of my closest friends that year. And I mean, yeah, it was kind of an instant connection between the two of us, and became really good friends. And hearing that her little brother was coming to Lister, I could only imagine what that would bring. She said he was your typical small town hockey playing, beer drinking guy, and I said,
Yeah.
Court, I'm going to stop you right there. Like, you're going to get me too excited. And obviously, you and I hit it off just as well as Court and I did, and obviously still friends to this day. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's funny to hear you say that you heard another person from Slave Lake, you being from Peace River, just northern communities, and I think that was something that I looked for too when I kind of came to university. It's a big step up from a small town to a big city. The schooling's 100% different. You're not under your parents' roof. You're kind of on your own for the first bit, and you almost reach out for that home feeling, and I think that was something I looked for, was people from small towns as well, and that was a big experience for myself, kind of going into that university. You go from a little pond to a big ocean almost in one fell swoop. And I didn't know you when you went through that, but how was that experience for you in your first year, when you came from Peace River into Edmonton and jumped into that circus that is Lister?
Well, I mean, in one word, if I had to describe it, the word would probably be a little blurry. I probably didn't focus as much on the studies as I should have, and what actually resulted in that was probably one of the bigger strokes of luck in my life. In high school, I loved science. I was good at science. I got a very good mark in all of the 3 sciences in high school, and so I just naturally thought that science was the way to go. And small town kid doesn't really know much about the workforce. I mean, coming from Peace River, outside of the pulp mill or the oil sands, any type of other line of professional work, you just didn't get the exposure to. So I figured, I'm good at science. There's science courses at the UofA, and thinking to myself, how would I be able to practically apply that? What I had landed on was pharmacy. And when I went into university, I had my sights set on pharmacy. I think the joke that I wrote in my grade 12 yearbook is that I wanted to be a drug dealer legally.
Yeah.
And it was a bit of a joke back then, but I was really serious about it. And come first year, all of the amazing things that Lister provided me in first year, the one thing that really did hurt me was it came at a sacrifice at my studies. And it was a tough year academically. didn't get the marks that I needed, didn't even get relatively in the same stratosphere as what I needed to get into pharmacy. And fortunately, I was able to do a lot of soul searching in that first year before it was actually too late to pick my next semester courses. And I kid you not, first year university was when I found the series Entourage, and
Oh yeah.
and I would binge watch Entourage, probably 2, 3, 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
Again, to the detriment of my education. But just seeing not as much. I can't sit here and honestly tell you that Ari Gold influenced my decision to become, go into business, because he was a total airhead and a complete jackass, and I didn't want to emulate him in any way. It was just more so the concept of being able to really do whatever you want. I mean, pharmacy, you get a pharmacy degree, you are a pharmacist, and that's what you do. That's what the rest of your life is going to be. And I like a little excitement in my life, and I didn't think that, and at risk of completely discounting the amazing work that pharmacists do, I didn't want to count to 20 my whole life, and realize now that their role is very different than that in the medical system. But at that point in my life, I didn't know. And so at that point, I made the quick decision to change it up the second semester. I didn't drop any courses. I just changed my next semester's enrollment and got the microeconomics, macroeconomics, the calculus, the entry level prerequisites for business. And it's a competitive program to get into. And because of what had happened in the first semester of first year, for the record, had an absolute ton of fun. I don't think we can forget about that. But everything happens for a reason. And ultimately, what I was able to really learn out of that experience was, this isn't for me. And I think, disguised behind all the fun that I was having, trying to, I don't want to say cover up, because that was not what it was, but it really put things into perspective and helped me to kind of take that step back and really think about what I wanted out of life.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I made the decision to shake it up. And obviously, sitting here talking to you today, probably one of the best 3 or 4 decisions I had ever made in my life up to this point. The first being to stay in residence, to go to UofA. The second being to change up that application, that education. The third, which I'm sure we'll get into later, is how things started with TD and what that hiring story looked like, and the fourth, obviously, being the person that I chose to spend the rest of this life with.
Yes, and what a good choice that was, and I'm sure we'll get into all of those things. But just bringing it right back to the start, you had told me that before, and I forgot about it. It just reminded me now that you didn't actually come into school, because I feel like when I think of business and I think of business at the U of A and the business school, it all revolved around you, because by the time I was coming into university, you were already my third year. Would that have your third year? Would that have been your first year of business?
Yeah. So after, in the second semester of first year, again, because of what happened in first year, I think I had like a 2.7 GPA, and you needed like a 3.3 minimum, but it was competitive. So that threshold tended to be closer to the 3.4, 3.5.
Yeah.
So I didn't have the marks to get in after first year. And I kind of knew that going in, eyes wide open. I knew that this year wasn't going to be the year. I still applied, didn't get in. So the real focus of my second year was, I need to find a better balance. I'm not going to sit here and say, I'm not going to go have fun with my friends. I'm not going to give up the things that were the funnest part of university, but there had to be a balance, because if there wasn't a balance, then what's that going to do to my health? People talk about the freshman 15, and coming from back home where, I played junior hockey in high school, and we were exercising, 6-7 days a week.
Yeah.
And to go from that to, drinking beer 4, 5, 6, 7 days a week, that is not the healthiest
No.
decision to make. So, I was able to find that balance. My marks improved significantly. And what I actually found was people always say, work hard, play hard. And I was able to actually have more fun when I wasn't studying
Mhm.
because I knew that I had earned it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, I got significantly better marks in
Mhm.
my second year, which ultimately allowed me to get accepted into business. And that's would have been when you and I met.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. It's funny to hear you talk about um, pharmacology as a degree when I just so associate you with business. But one thing I kind of am curious about, because this is something I found, was the education system and the teaching that I got coming from Slave Lake. When I went to university, what a wake up call it was, and how ill prepared I was for school. That definitely the blurriness you refer to and the drinking didn't help me either. And that was a big part of that transition being tougher than it probably needed to be. But definitely, I remember a story. It was the first midterms were just coming up, my first semester, and my FC Scott at that time was rounding up the floor, telling us like, okay, there's good book rooms in C6, book rooms in ECA, and all these places, book rooms for studying. Book rooms for studying? Like, I didn't study in high school. You guys study here? Like, what are you talking about? Like, but I guess if everyone's booking rooms, that's what we do. So I like joined one of the little study groups with some girls on my floor, and I went there, and if this is the hours they're putting in, I'm going to match it. And I just barely scraped through on the midterm, right? And it was, holy shit, thank God I did do that, right? And I just found like, man, I was not prepared for that. And then I think this isn't just a small town thing, but when you talk with the freshman 15, which for myself, it was more like the freshman 30, 40 for sure. Coming into that over the years, it was always, start of the year, you go into Lister and you gain, 30 pounds, and then you go for the summer and you just kick ass all summer, come back all lean and mean, maybe not to the point you were at the start of the year before, and then go it all again. It's just a compounding factor. And I don't think that's something that anybody prepares you. I don't think if you grow up in Slave Lake or New York City, you're not prepared for that. It's just that stepping out of the rule set that you've lived in with your whole life with your family and your structure, and like you say, hockey 6-7 times a week, working out into this thing where you just think you don't realize how much so much is changing around you, that you don't realize all the change that's happening around you, and you're so susceptible to falling into these ignorant traps that you don't even know are there, both academically and for your own health and mental health and all these things. And that's why I think it's so important to I think the education system needs to add some of those life soft skills into the pre-university level, so that when you go, you're not so ill prepared for that big step that it is, because everyone knows you're taking a big step. And it seems like with that knowledge, we still send kids in unprepared year after year. And maybe that's part of it. And I think that is, that wake up call helps prepare you. And it's kind of that sink or swim moment. If you can't figure this out on your own, maybe you shouldn't be here. But I just wanted to see how much maybe of your journey was the blurriness we refer to, and how much do you think was actually just not being set up in the correct way. And maybe if you had a little bit more guidance going in, or a different system going into it, that you would have fared a little bit better off the hop.
Yeah, I think I was able to actually adjust fairly well,
Yeah.
compared to, I mean, Peace River was a town of, I think at the time, around 7 or 8,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
And the U of A campus at the time had 36,000 undergraduate students. So orders of magnitude higher than
Mm-hmm.
than any group that I had ever been associated with before that. And it was overwhelming. I remember having to send a Facebook message to one of my old one of my old high school
Mm-hmm.
teachers that I knew had gone to U of A. And I was like, where the hell is this building? Like, I cannot for the life of me find where this building is. And luckily he was able to kind of point me in the right direction. And this was for my first ever lecture on my first day of my first year of university.
Yeah.
And the way that it was set up, I'm sure it still is well, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, I'm sure it was similar setup, maybe not as much today, but
Yeah.
10 minutes in between classes. And that's kind of the same amount of time we had at high school. But the difference was you didn't have to walk down the hall to get to your next class. You had to walk like across campus. I
Mm-hmm.
remember having
Finding parking.
back-to-back classes from the ETLC building on the far west side of the campus over to the Torrey Lecture Theatre, which was probably about a 10-minute walk for the average person. But what university does to you is it changes the speed at which you would consider walking at an average pace. Because when you have to go, I would say probably a kilometer or two on foot across campus, navigating these buildings, finding your shortcuts, not to mention then getting into the building, getting to the floor, finding your room, finding a seat, getting your laptop out, getting actually ready to be able to take in some of this content.
Not to mention walking through more people than live in your hometown that whole way, right? You're not only do you have to figure out where this building that is, sometimes kilometers away from where you are. You have 10 minutes. You're battling these throngs of crowds. If you're coming from a small town, you never see this many people, right? Unless it's I don't know, county fair or something. But like you just don't see it, and it's such a mind fuck. I remember having to have Courtney walk me to every class I had for that first semester, showing me actually what building, what classroom, and just like almost planning my route, going through it beforehand, because I was so lost with that. And, I'm a pretty capable guy, but even I was just, your head spins with all the new stuff. And that's on top of, this high level schooling of the reason. That's all auxiliary to the reason you're there, which being the schooling and this step up in classroom and adulthood. It's not like high school where you could break the ice messing around. I don't know if you're like myself, but most of class was messing around and making people laugh and joking was the whole time I was there. I was barely there to learn. That was auxiliary to my experience, right? Was the learning. And then you go to a university where you're in a lecture hall of, a couple hundred people, and there's no cracking jokes to lighten the load and, get to know people. It's just, you were there and you were there to learn. If you don't understand something, it's gone by, and, that's up to you to figure out what you missed. And that was a big process for myself to take on, just because of, how and that's my own fault. I had set myself up for that. If I would have taken my high schooling a little more serious, I probably would have been a little bit more prepared for that. But that's life, and that's what it forces you into. And I learned so much from that, and you grow so much, right?
Well, unfortunately for me, I never had to put in as much effort in high school in order to get good marks. I was very consistently on the honor roll, above the 80%, and I never had to put in the work that a lot of people had to, and that really came around to bite me in university, because I did not have a single study skill. I didn't know what type of learner I was. I didn't know whether I was most effective in the mornings, in the afternoons, in the evenings, in the middle of the night. Like, those are all things that you have to learn about yourself. And I think one of the biggest things is, in terms of, I think you just mentioned, like, the skills that you were equipped with going in. I think one of the biggest ones that really can't necessarily be taught, but is super valuable and essential to anybody's success in that type of setting, is resiliency.
Oh yeah.
I mean, just the ability to be able to stick yourself into a completely foreign situation and just be able to get through it, figure out, what do I need in order to be successful? How can I equip myself with that? And on the opposite end, what do I not need, and what do I need to get out of my head, get out of my life? And it's a huge transition, whether it's just the size of population. I think one of the biggest things that I'm thrilled about to this day is just an increase in diversity. I mean, in Peace River, there was not nearly the same level of diversity as there is in a major city, and that was something. I don't want to say it was a learning for me, because I obviously knew that there were different cultures and different races, religions, sexual orientations, you name it. But I had never actually been as nearly as comfortable around all of it, because I never was exposed to it. So
100%.
something that I had to learn, and thankfully so, being in the type of environment that Lister was, because it's not something that I ever really thought about. And I never considered myself a racist or a homophobe or anything. I'm sure everybody would sit here and not categorize themselves as that, but really had to learn to ask questions, but from a positive place.
Yes.
and
Yeah.
not, not be asking ignorant questions, like actually
Hmm.
coming from a genuine place of wanting to learn and wanting to open my horizons. And what
Yes.
I found, even up till this day in my professional environment, just being able to ask some of these questions that I wouldn't have even thought about asking people, um, a couple of years back, just with
Hmm.
everything going on in society today.
Yeah, and I mirror that experience so closely, Justin. It's so funny to hear somebody else say that, because I've thought all those things a ton, and I think I even expanded to past that, because not only was it, yeah, you're seeing all these new cultures and these things that you'd never really seen before, and it was your first experiences, or the only experiences you have, or the um, TV shows that are not very closely showing what the actual cultures are about, and what the people are actually like, and being able to learn that skill, because you don't realize that's a skill that you don't have. That, for myself, not putting that on you, but I remember getting to university and realizing, oh, my whole life I'd just been interacting with the same type of people for the most part, right? There's only, very few roles you can fall into. And then even within that, uh, kind of what I want to expand on that, Justin, was, I don't know if Peace River was the same way, but Slave Lake was very much, not only is there not a lot of different cultures, it wasn't as much of a melting pot as it was once I got to university, but even within that, the groups that were there, it was very one way, right? All the guys in the high school were, there was one thing that was cool. It was being tough. It was being, it was very much that oil field machismo. And just to even see past all the other things that you already kind of noted on, I was even, in a bit of a cultural spin of, holy man, what is this freedom to be who you want? And, I can let out my more feminine side, because I was always a sensitive kid, right? But that never really played in Slave Lake, right? You show your sensitivity for a second and you're jumped right on, right? And maybe that's sports, maybe that's hockey, right? That's a little bit of that in there. But just learning that can be okay. And then to start that, I feel like for myself, that vulnerability opened up the ability to ask some questions about myself, because I was always that person. I never wanted to, if I was bothered about something, I didn't want to talk about it. I was that stoic, men don't talk about our feelings and all that kind of stuff. But opening up that vulnerability to, and not even opening up, it's having the freedom, like you said, to come at these things with, to come and ask these questions with a from a place of compassion and a place of wanting to learn. Um, and I think because you could do that in Lister, Justin, was because of the culture that Lister created, and that family. You would be able to um, get to know these people on such a deep, almost familial level, and then it opened the door to be able to ask them. It gave you a safe space to ask these questions that you didn't know, right? Because you do want to educate yourself, but maybe if you hadn't been able to put that work in. And I found that same sense. It was almost a sense of what Lister did and what it opened the doors to, allowed you to have all these, it was almost just like a safety net, that whatever cultural lessons or personal value lessons, whatever lessons you needed to learn, it was a safety net below you, that you wouldn't be judged too harshly on whatever you did. It was a place to learn. And I felt like that's what universities should be. But Lister was kind of that microcosm of it. And when you went out into the university, it was very much not that. And it was very much, you better do things right. And if you offend somebody, or if you say the wrong word, right, it was very much about, you can only say these words. And it was very restrictive. And so was Lister, but it all came from a good heart. And even if you weren't supposed to say those words, you could find those people where you build the connections, where if you were genuinely curious and you were coming from a good place, you could find that knowledge without feeling too put out by it. And I don't know if that any of that mirrors your experience, but that was kind of what I found. It was very transformative for myself to walk into something like that and be able to learn those lessons with that safety net below me.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that you said there that kind of resonate. And I think the first one was just around like the level of exposure you do have to you know, different thought schools of thought. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned the oil field, the alpha male sports mentality of not wanting to show weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think kind of where I thought you were going to go around that was in terms of the cultures that were present in our
Oh,
communities.
I see.
Um, one of my biggest eye-opening moments was, as part of work a couple years ago on Indigenous Day. I was participated in a webcast that went and was talking through a lot of the what happened with the residential schools in
Mm-hmm.
Canada, and I could not believe how little I knew about the people. I mean, Peace River. There's a lot of reserves around Peace River. I know Slave
Mm-hmm.
Lake is the same way.
Yep.
And playing hockey, growing up with a lot of Indigenous kids, You know, a lot of them coming from some pretty difficult situations. And if you don't realize, you know, what they've been through and the types of damage that's been inflicted, you would have zero sense of any of that. And to look back on all the stereotypes of the Indigenous peoples up by Peace River, you know, whether it relates to mental health, substance abuse, violence, crime, and you start to realize, you know, what had played into putting them into that position today.
Definitely.
And I think what resonated with me the most out of that was, you know, having that family unit be able to show people growing up what a strong family is like. Well, when you take kids out of their family, put them in an institution that was these residential schools, they have no concept of family. So when they graduate this school and look to begin families of their own, they don't have that family concept. So how can you expect them to raise a strong family without having those skills that you and I take for total granted? And you know, it brought tears to my eyes on this webcast, and I couldn't believe that I had lived my whole life up to this point, you know, with this total misconception about a lot of these different communities. And I think the second thing that came to mind as you were going through that was around a very different side of this. But one of my best friends in first year university, I learnt through a bit of an unfortunate situation that she was Muslim. And you know, growing up in a Catholic school in religion class, you always hear about different types of religions and what their core values are, and you kind of pay attention, you're kind of not, because that's just how high school is, regardless of the class and religion in particular. But one of my biggest like aha moments was, I was sitting in the common room of my floor, and I was eating a meal from the calf. One of my friends walked up to me and kind of asked, what am I eating, and you know, is it any good? And so I was like, yeah, like have a try. Like they're these, you know, dry ribs from the calf. She takes a bite, kind of chews on it. She's like, wow, this is like really, really good. It's like, yeah, they're like, you know, these pork dry ribs. And just the little color in her face that she had completely disappeared. And I looked over at her and I was like, is everything okay? Like are you feeling sick? Like, what is it? She spits out what's in her mouth and into a napkin. And she looks at me. She's like, Justin, was this pork? And I looked at her and I was like, yeah, like what's the big deal? She's like, Justin, I'm Muslim. Like I can't eat pork. And then the color out of my face completely disappeared. And I'm like, holy shit, not only did I just learn that Muslim people don't eat pork, I just fed someone who I didn't know was Muslim a piece of pork, which I didn't know they couldn't eat. Not only did that teach me the whole cultural side of that, what it also taught me was people don't necessarily, you know, it's more than what meets the eye. Because I know you know who I'm talking about after mentioning the little color in her face, and she would be the first to tell you that, you know, she's about as white as they come. But Amira, one of my closest friends, you know, she does not look Muslim. You know, there's that, you know, when you think Muslim, there's that definition in your head that you kind of picture, and she does not fit that bill. And then hearing her talk later on about the type of discrimination that her family had faced, particularly her father. Her father's originally from Lebanon. He looks the Muslim part, so to speak. And the rest of her family doesn't. And hearing about how he was treated differently than them almost everywhere they went, specifically in airports, around like the increase of screening, and everybody saying, oh, you know, it's just routine screening. Well, it's not routine when the dad gets pulled to the side every single time, and the mom and 4 daughters, with the red hair, the pale skin don't. So you want to call it random screening, then call it that all you want, but that's really not what it is. So
Right.
I think a ton of learnings that I had, obviously just two kind of small pieces of a much bigger puzzle as how I've really learned about diversity and continue to learn. In my work right now, I have on my broader team at work, out of about 60 people, 10 of them are members of the Black community. And going through this, the Black Lives Matter movement, and hearing from different people what are some of the things that they've done to get a better understanding of not only their culture, but how we can actually take steps to learn and to grow ourselves, and to hopefully be able to look back on this as that one single event that changed society for the better. I don't think we're there yet, clearly, but I'm an optimist. I like to think that we can get rid of this BS once and for all.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, culture moving forward and society moving forward definitely is a stop and start process. And there's times where momentum is gained and lost in those fights for rights. And I think, like you said, it was a huge moment with what's been going on. And it's funny to hear that, because it just ties so many. I heard you so many things that I want to touch on. Just even for someone like myself that was very, lucky to have parents that allowed me to travel, and I got to see the world, and I got to see so many cultures. You're only dipping your toes in. And even with all that, I still made that story, not that exact story you just told, Justin, but in so many different ways of those, those little mistakes you don't know. It's just part of that constant learning. And even, I would categorize myself as someone, decently worldly, even going into Lister, with all that being said about growing up in Slave Lake, but I'd still been, all around the world. And you still are going to make those mistakes, because you can't know anything. The only responsibility on you is to take those moments and try your best to learn from it, and try to better yourself. And kind of tying this all back together was when George Floyd was killed, it started a movement, and it was kind of put to people that here is what you need to do to help. And it was kind of the one way. And if you didn't get on board with that way, I felt like you were automatically labeled as something, even if you did really, really feel for the cause and want to help, but in a different way. Like for myself, I responded a little bit differently. I didn't, reshare a black square or anything. I just felt like that was too much of a cop out, but I really invested. I listened to probably, a couple hundred hours of black intellectuals that I thought had really cool points. Chloe Valderi, William Chatterson, Mike Rashid, Killer Mike had some amazing thing, and just really invested in that. And I was hearing all these different ideas, but even to see within those crowds what was allowed and disallowed, if it didn't line up with the overarching Black Lives Matter movement, they were even being shut down and censored on their own, even though there were these really amazing intellectuals. And just seeing that, it was a little eye-opening for myself to see. It was a little disheartening to see that it was less about the progress and more about how the progress was attained, and being on the right side of how you go about it. But one of the biggest pieces of when I did dig into all these really, really powerful black intellectuals that really changed my mind. It's changed my thinking on so much over the last couple of months. I've just had a real renaissance with a lot of the things that it taught me. And one of the biggest things was the understanding of what a destruction of culture can be. When you talk about the residential schools, Justin, I wanted to even touch on that even further. Not only is it, I had that same realization about many things of just, man, you almost want to cry just because of the ignorance of the pain that you didn't know was out in the world. And just, you can think back of all the different interactions you've had without that knowledge, and how you could have been insensitive throughout it, right? I've been there and I understand that. And one of the biggest ones that I found was just what it can do to people. And it was I can't remember who exactly made this point so eloquently, but they actually had made it about the residential schools and the Indigenous, and what a powerful culture the Indigenous culture, and there's so many, and they're so widely varied across all the different tribes and everything. I understand that, but as a core overarching theme, they're very spiritual people, very tied to nature, and just what that can do to a people to strip that away from them. And that also, until you understand the actual effects of what, right? Because it's not just the indigenous, right? There was, with slaves, they're stripped of the culture, in the indigenous, there's so many, throughout history, you can see, these people stripped of their culture and just what a strong effect that has. You almost, even if you, because I had done a lot of independent research into residential schools and I thought I had done my work and I thought I had really understood it and had a good stance on it. But because I didn't understand the full ramifications of what that process is, I still had another kick in the teeth moment just a couple months ago. But holy man, I really didn't understand the full breadth of what this is, right? And what that does to people, and what you can see when you can restore pieces of that, and watching indigenous peoples reunite themselves with nature, and these traditional rites of passage, and what it does for them when you talk about lots of those issues that were the stereotypes that we grew up with in northern Alberta, around substance abuse and around all these things, and how much just reuniting any people with their culture can stem off all of these issues that we see popping up because that are caused by that are so immediately rectified. And yet there's so much ignorance surrounding the effect of stripping someone's culture away, that I think that needs to be another big awakening, on top of all the civil rights that we're fighting for, and police violence. That's all important too. But I feel like until we can understand the actual effects of what some of these things are, and people can wake up to the real, I feel like that is the real harm, on top of all these other harms, that is not being, understood enough for us to make real movement forward. Because I feel like when people are just so focused on making change without really taking the time to evaluate where they really believe it's stemming from, that's where we start getting down roads and wasting time. Whereas if you just take the time, do some really, soul searching and some deep work on where you think the real roots of these problems are, and then you can, go out and tackle them. And I think that is just one way that, and there's all the million ways, and there's a million ways to look at these issues. And obviously I'm just looking at it from an outsider's perspective of just what I want to do, and what I just, I got to that point because it just felt like I want to help so bad, but I don't know how to help. And the all the options I was seeing from the mainstream of what you're supposed to do is, we'll reshare a black square. I know that helps, but that doesn't feel like the kind of help I want to do. I want to learn more. I want to invest more. And I jumped into it on that side, and I found so many awakens. But I just feel like now we're a couple months forward, people are just, sharing the same things and not actually doing any work. And we're at the same spot, and we haven't moved forward very much. And I just feel like I don't know what we can do to get people to, maybe try some different paths if they really care about this as much as, their social media would show. Maybe some more concrete ways that they can do some real work and do some real learning, and maybe help bring some options forward. I find at work, one of the things that pisses me off the most, Justin, was people come up with problems, and never come up with a solution to come with them, right? I'll hear your problems, but it makes it feel so much better, even if it's not a good solution, just a solution. But it feels like so many people right now are just bitching about the problems and staying as far away from any solution finding they can do, right? I know that's
Yeah.
long-winded, but
Yeah, I mean, like with the whole black square on social media, I told myself right off the bat, when this all really started to be, front and center in mainstream media around George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, and it still fascinates me to this day how, three letters BLM can invoke this type of reaction out of people. Like, it blows my mind that there is a significant group of population, whether it's American, whether it's Canadian. I'm sure this would apply across the world, but you talk about Black Lives Matter, and the instinctual reaction of so many people is to discount or to divert or to downplay or to become combative. And that's really all you need to know about where these people truly lie. There's the whole Black Lives Matter. Well, all lives matter. Well, no shit, all lives matter,
Yeah.
but all lives don't need us right now.
Exactly.
It's like the whole Facebook black square. Like, I myself didn't share the black square because I told myself right off the bat, how I want to approach this, and this is, for a bit of context, this is probably 1 month into a brand new job for me, where the size of my team increased quite significantly.
Right.
And I think I mentioned earlier, 10 out of my 60 colleagues are members of the Black community. And when 1 in 6 of your team is is affected directly by a
Yes.
lot of these underlying issues,
Hmm.
I mean, silence wasn't an option for me.
Right.
It was how do I actually do something meaningful for them? Not
Hmm.
for me. I'm not after, 100 likes on Facebook for posting a black square. I'm not
Right.
after the social media rah. I don't really give a shit about how many likes I get on
Hmm.
Facebook or Instagram. But for me, it was about how can I actually make an impact, and it started with listening, and it started with just genuinely wanting to gain a better understanding.
Right.
And so the first kind of conversation I had was with one of my direct reports. Um, she was originally from Africa, immigrated to Canada, later in life. And I asked her, I was like, just, how are you doing?
Hmm.
Because I told myself, this isn't about me, this is about them. And if and I want to come from a genuine place of caring, because that's where I'm coming from. And the last thing I want to do is make this about me.
Hmm.
So I asked her, how are you doing? And the look on her face, I will never forget, because she did not see that coming.
Right.
And I don't blame her. I don't blame her that she was shocked that, the straight white male, the literal definition of privilege in our society is asking her about how something is impacting her.
Right.
And she was amazing. She opened up, she shared a couple stories about not only how racism has directly impacted her in her life,
Hmm.
but her family and their journey to Canada, and and all the things that went along with that. And I asked for her advice on, I want to do something, I want to say something, I want to address this somehow. um, do you have any advice for me on how to approach this? Because I was 1 month into this new job. I realized that this was, at least in my mind, it was a significant turning point in me as a leader in business.
Hmm.
And I knew I wanted to do something. I just wanted to make sure that I was headed into the right direction. And
Right.
and her answer was, approach it exactly how you approached it with me. Come from a genuine place of caring,
Yes.
and make it about me, because it's not about you.
Yeah.
And so over the next, I think it was 6 or 7 days, I had actually connected one on one, virtually, of course, because this was not that long ago.
Hmm.
Early summer, late spring, right in the heat of COVID-19.
Yeah.
But made a point to connect individually with everybody from that Black community, and had that conversation. And my biggest learning there is, this is not a one size fits all problem.
Yeah.
You can't go into it expecting that everybody has been impacted the same way, to the same extent.
Hmm.
And I heard from people that had really never been impacted by racism, and I heard from people that had been, pretty significantly.
Yeah.
And and it really just opened my eyes, especially right at the start of the whole Black Lives Matter movement. Everybody in Canada seemed to be like, this is an American problem. This
Yeah.
is this is you. This is you. We are on this high horse, being
Hmm.
Canada. Everybody loves Canada.
Yeah.
And then somebody pointed out, the 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 situation with the Black community in the States. We actually have a pretty damn good comparison in Canada, so we just
Hmm.
all need to open our eyes to that a little bit.
Yeah.
And I, like I said before, I continue to learn. My work is having, a Black Lives Matter continuing the conversation,
Hmm.
sessions throughout the fall, and it's enterprise wide. So 80,000-90,000 people are going to be attending these. And I raised my hand to be one of the many, like, facilitators of these sessions. And
Right.
um, we've stood up, it's called the Black Leadership Advisory and Action Committee, in at our work. And And the person I was speaking about before that I had that initial conversation with, she's actually on this leadership advisory and action committee. So she will be jointly presenting and facilitating these sessions with a few of our leaders across the business, eventually to hopefully the whole company. And when you talk about what can I do to not only show my support, but to actually make a difference, when I first heard about that opportunity, I mean, it was a no-brainer for me. As uncomfortable as it will be, I'm sure our first kind of real planning meeting that I'm a part of is tomorrow. So really looking forward to seeing where this goes, but recognizing that this is not going to be comfortable. But that's also kind of the whole point.
Right. 100%. Yeah, no, and that's amazing to hear, and it doesn't surprise me one bit, because what at the end of the day, what things are really about is the genuine who you are on the inside and how much you do care about people and you have love and respect for everybody, right? And I know that in you because I've known you quite well, and I know that's be exactly what you wanted to how you would approach that. And it's funny, it's not funny, but it's almost beautiful to hear. So you had someone right at work you could directly talk to. I didn't have that option, right? During COVID, I was kind of stuck. I only saw a couple people in my office. So my locus of, control was where I always look at. I believe firmly in the power of long form conversation podcasts. And I feel like when somebody talks for, 2 to 3 hours, they really can't hide behind bullshit and they have to be honest. So I went through that medium, and I went and I wanted to find Black voices, right? I was seeing on Instagram that, shop at Black stores. So, well, I'm not really even shopping right now, but what can I do? And I went down that path, right? And it just would find, I'd find one super interesting person, start looking at their stuff. They'd have a guest on it, and it just kind of grew over a couple weeks of really, investing time into it. I found probably, 10 to 15 voices that I follow on all the social media and listen to their podcasts of these, really forward thinking, Black men and women. And I just tried to take, this is what I do with lots of things. I try and take as many people that I can really, trust and respect their opinions, through podcasting, because I feel like that's where rubber meets the road. If I listen to, 15 hours of you being as honest as you can, I know, more or less, you can still trick me, but it's tougher. And then I try to find the commonalities between those. That's what's got me into meditation. That's what's got me, like, before all this, I heard way too many successful people like Seinfeld and all these people doing this TM, this transcendental meditation. Okay, well, if that many people do this and it works out that great for them, there's got to be something there, right? And it was funny to hear when I was trying to look at it down this avenue of what they came up with. And the biggest thing I heard was exactly what you found out from one conversation, Justin, was they said, if you want to do something, talk to people, but make sure it's coming from a compassionate place. Make sure you genuinely want to learn, and don't make it about you. Right. And that's exactly what I heard from all these people that I really respected and got to learn and really learned a lot from. It was that, don't make it about you. But that's what set me off so much. And then hearing this from them, of hearing their point of view, of seeing this all go and seeing these people jump on and make it about themselves on social media and, in the streets a lot of the time, right? A lot of that looting wasn't the people that were being fought for, that were in the stores breaking down windows and stuff, right? And that was, a lot to deal with. Now, not only are you fighting, fighting society for change, you're now fighting against the people that are supposed to be on your side, right? Those people that are arm in arm with you walking into battle. Now you're, fighting against them too, because now they're making it about themselves and making the entire movement look bad. And that the other thing that I heard from a lot of them, Justin, which is, I hear what you said earlier about, when people say Black Lives Matter, and if they respond with all lives matter, yeah, of course, we have no time for you, right? If you can't have the compassion to put yourself in someone else's shoes, right? Like, I completely get that, but I don't think, after listening to these people, they opened me up to some things I didn't realize within. It's the separation of, like, BLM and hashtag BLM, like Black Lives Matter as an idea. And if Black Lives Matter, of course, like 100%, but then they showed, some of the underlying goals of what, the movement itself and the leaders of the movement were trying to move forward. And they actually were saying that they were actually hurting the cause of what they were looking for, and hurting the, the movement, fighting against things like the saying that the nuclear family is racist, right? That is a completely untrue statement. The nuclear family is good for anybody across the world. There's been thousands and thousands of studies showing 2-parent households are successful for, a conducive child rearing environment. an attack on that is not going to move forward. It's not going to be good for any people, right? If we want to, specify it down to one people versus the next, it's just people in general, human beings, that's not conducive to them, right? Like things like that. And I feel like sometimes the argument has become so strong that you have to be for or against, that it's lost the nuance for the little bit of, there's not a lot of nuance to the whole, Black Lives Matter. There's not a lot of nuance to that phrase, Black Lives Matter, right? I think we can both agree on that. There is no nuance. That is just a true fact. And people that kind of understand that. But I think once it's tied to a movement and now there's people in control that can say what it is, you have to be able to call that out, because that is, as much as I agree with where you're trying to get to, if you now have tools and programs to get yourself there that don't align with now the spirit of what we're trying to do, we have to address that, be able to have a conversation on that, decide as a group, is this something that we think is going to move us forward, or is this actually something that's hurting the cause? Can we discuss it? But it seems like now it's turned into that, because there's so much emphasis put on that. And I agree that you hear one thing, if you say anything other than this, we don't have time for you, which I agree in the most sense. But if you've given enough, if you've dug into it and you've listened, because the thing that gets me is I didn't realize all of that. And I was so on board with all this until I got to these multi-levels deep, and I heard it from actual Black voices telling this to me about the program, and they're going in and seeing that there's actual, things hidden inside that aren't actually good for the spirit. I think probably one of the best ones I was listening to was Chloe Valderi, and she has a program called The Theory of Enchantment, and it uses pop culture and it's very beautiful, and music to bring together the different races. And just the idea comes from when you're out on a dance floor, Justin, you don't feel the different cultures around you. It's a certain movement and a feeling that captures everybody, and it's based off of that, and it's almost a shared spirit that every culture has across, and you can find it in different ways, right? Like when Michael Jackson took over the world, it wasn't, one culture liked him, one culture didn't, right? It was a worldwide phenomenon, and focusing on that, and that is within us. There's times where you tap into it, right? And it's usually through a very, unilaterally connected person that can tap into everybody, but it's always there. They're just tapping into that, right? And that's what it focuses on. And I think she was the one that showed me lots of the ideas, but it was, again, mirrored. I heard it so many times from so many different people that are really worried about some of the things that are inside, and are Black voices that are, not being maybe shown. And there's some, there's some on all sides, but I definitely noticed that. And I think that that's a very important distinction that we have to keep and not dive too far into, because I think that could be one of the things where if we say that there's only one way, like our goal is equality, and there's only one way to get to equality, now dangerous things can happen, because that can be co-opted. And you've already seen how many people jump on and try and make this about them. We have to be very clear that we, watch it, make sure it doesn't stray off the path of the goal we're wanting to get to. I'm not arguing that the goal is unjust or not something that's very clearly, I just hate that is even an argument. Do you think if there wasn't an actual issue here that it would have that strong of a reaction? Do you think the entire world wouldn't have flipped everything on its head and tore shit down if there wasn't a real feeling of inequity that was being felt, a real genuine thing? Do you think that? No, but that doesn't mean we have to blindly follow whatever they say to correct that feeling that everyone is rightfully feeling, right?
Yeah, and like when all the violent protests and the looting and everything broke out, just that whole narrative around, violence is not the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And well, obviously not. Like everybody knows that.
Right.
But at some point, you need to also realize that this is not new to
Nope.
start. This is something that's
Mm-hmm.
been around for certainly both of our lifetimes, and I'm sure the lifetimes of a number of
Mm-hmm.
ancestors of both of ours. But to say that that you should have done this, or you should have reacted like that,
Mm-hmm.
you should have protested peacefully. Well, I know you're, I'm looking at your hat. I know you're an NFL fan, and the Colin Kaepernick, his silent protests.
Right.
Well, obviously that wasn't enough. That didn't do anything
Mm-hmm.
for the Black community. And so it's like, well, we've tried the nonviolent protests. Nobody's
Right.
listening. Nobody's doing anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And for something to change, it's not, the Black community doesn't have to change. It's you and I that need to change.
Right. Agreed.
If it's like whether it's feminism or women in leadership in professional settings, it's not about the women need to do this, or the black community needs to do that. It's, what do you and I need to do?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if gender equality is ever going to really happen in society, then it's going to take the males in order to drive
Mm-hmm.
that. If racism is going to go away, then it's going to be the people of privilege that actually make that change.
Yeah.
So it's always just kind of fascinating that we have this culture of, it's not my problem, or,
Mm-hmm.
this is racism isn't my problem. Well,
Mm-hmm. Or I don't
yeah,
see it, right?
it,
Yeah,
it
that's
kind of is your problem.
100%.
And I think, like anything else, one of my big philosophies that I've developed over the last couple of years is, what can I control and what can't I control?
Mm-hmm.
And what I can control is having those conversations, is
Yeah.
doing the research into the residential schools. It's having, showing my support on these town hall webcasts that we're about to have.
Mm-hmm.
um, you know the violence in the protests, not my control.
Right.
um, who's going to take a knee, who's going to raise a fist, who's going to do neither, none of that's in my control. But
Mm-hmm.
um, but not questioning their motives is within mine.
Right.
And so, I know we've been on this for a while now, but just kind of going back to that whole piece about not making it about me. Well, this
Yeah.
is kind of where we need to make it about us, because
Yeah.
this is where we hold the cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agreed with everything you said, Justin, right? And I think all those things do need to change, and and I know it's on us. I just think that the strategies that could go by, right? And this is all coming from what I heard from people that are telling, this is what we want to see. And it was exactly that. Come to it, be willing to have conversations as much as you can with yourself taken on the table, be genuinely curious, ask about their experiences, what they have seen, right? And less about, I have a weird way I think I can explain this, but it might go down some weird ass tangents to get there. So I was listening to one of my big rabbit holes that I've gone down the last few years is artificial intelligence. And I listened to this one podcast very religiously. It's one of my favorite ones, with a guy named Lex Friedman. He's incredible mind. He's about 30 years old. He goes to MIT and he works on AI. And he's also a modern philosopher. He's a Russian, and he's just a beautiful mind. And he was talking to another guy. They were talking about these problems they're having in developing neural networks and training these artificial intelligences with these data sets, and how that is, what's going good, what's not going good. And he explained it in kind of a cool way, that there's almost two different ways, right? Because they're basing a lot of these AI programs off of the brain and how the brain works, right? And our brain is good at learning in multiple different ways. And there's almost like a textual learning and experiential learning, and they're very two different things, right? You can read something out of a textbook and you can take in that information, but unless you have an experiential factor with it, you are only learning it to a certain degree, and it's limiting your effect to fully understand and use that information. So if I asked you a question, Justin, if I said, if I hammered a nail into my roof, what orientation would the nail be? Vertical or horizontal?
Well, it depends on your frame of reference.
Right, but just a quick answer. It's not
You
a trick
nail
question.
you nail a roof going upwards into your wall. I would say that is a vertical nail.
Right. So now, how, just real quick, right? This isn't trying to trick you, but how did you come up with that answer? If you just thought back to what you did.
Because vertical is up and down, and the nail
Yeah.
is
But
up and down.
so usually what you would do is you thought about it, right? You created a visual expanse inside your mind of visually seeing a nail go into it, right? It's an experiential, right? There's no text, there's no language-based learning that would allow you to do that, right? And that's what they're really struggling with AI. They can give these huge data dumps of text for them to learn that, but with no experiential, because as babies, that's all we're doing, right? We're just getting multiple data sets filled into our brain, right? And we're learning, and we're all our mistakes, and bumping things over and seeing how the world works. It's a whole different area, right? And it's a very key understanding for how people learn and how people move forward. I think what we're doing with a lot of these movements is we're doing kind of the right, and that's what they were saying. Sorry, I'm getting too far ahead of myself. So with these AI learnings, it's almost the they said the language learning, or the whatever verbiage they used to describe these, the verbal learning and like the text-based learning is what controls the actual experiential knowledge, right? It's almost the controller that plays the actual motor that is the experiential learning. And I think there's so much more power in experiential learning. I think that's a big hang up we have in so many different areas. That comes in education, right? When you sit in that lecture hall with 200 people and you're just copying off the board, is very different than a classroom of 25 in a grad student scenario where you're discussing and you're battling these ideas back and forth, and coming to a resolution. And that's where the real learning and the real progress happens in that. And I think what I'm hearing from a lot of these powerful voices is that we need to move away, and because the textual learning is just telling people what they need is the conversations happen to people to understand this, right? You can be sat in a lecture about inclusivity for 2 hours at work every day, and you might come out of that more racist than you went in, right? Just being pissed off at it. But if you sat with someone genuinely and talked about their experiences, that is what moves us forward. And we need to find, right, but that's hard. The reason we go for these more text-based or base level education things, because they're easily widespread, they're easy to roll out to the masses, and they do have use to them. But what we really need is people to genuinely care and genuinely try and reach out, ask someone what their experiences with racism are, with sexism, with all these things, and try and find where they can actually affect you and change the way you're looking at it. And I don't think it's a one size fits all, but I just feel like because you have to be so on board with whatever the mainstream idea of what's going to solve this is, that we can't even have the discussion about these other ways that are also really important, like you said, of what you did on your own, Justin, and going to talk to someone and asking what they would like to do. Not everybody's going to do that, right? But that is almost what's really required. So what I would like to have a discussion on is, okay, so let's also do all these things that we're talking about, and they're all great, but why can we not discuss additional or different ways of attacking the same problem, right? If it's all about Black Lives Matter and we just want to make the best, most equitable scenario, shouldn't we be looking at it from all angles? And just when I hear all the other discussions on that shut down right away, my red flags go up of, okay, why are we doing this? Why are we, if it really is about this and it's not about making it about ourselves, but it's very easy. It's hard to make an experiential learning like that about yourself, where it's very easy to take those text-based learning of, hey, look at me, I'm sharing these things that are just cookie cutter, that aren't actually affecting people, that people aren't reading, right? It's almost an echo chamber of, you put all these great learning tools and things for people to change our dynamics. They get shared around the same little group on Facebook or Instagram. The same people read them that already believe this stuff. It's not, you're preaching to the choir almost, and it's never reaching the people that actually need to hear it, that might be changed, right? That experience that me and you both went through probably thousands of time, walking to Lister and being making a mistake, but having the compassion for them to be okay, and say, I know you didn't understand that, but here's what you learned, and that stuck with you. I bet you haven't made that same mistake with pork once again in your life after that, because you felt so terribly about it, right? And it's those things that really stick with you and almost change who you are on an operating level. And those are the real impacts that we need. But there's no discussion about how we move that forward on a more broader scape, right? And I'm not saying I have the ideas. I don't know how to do it either, but I would at least would like to hear the discussion.
Yeah, and I mean, like, even going back to the pork example, like, even then, and even now, like, even as I tell this story, like, it all comes back around as, again, being about me and my
Yep.
learning, where
Yep.
I mean, if it takes me feeling horrible about myself in order for me to learn a
Right.
lesson about another culture, then I mean, so be it, because it pales into comparison to what others have been through.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you touched on it in passing in your last statement there about, like, actually caring personally about people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in business, and in the few years that I've been working professionally, that has been an absolute game changer. When you think about the difference between a manager and a leader. A manager is a title. It's a position. It's a rank.
Mm-hmm.
It's your place in the hierarchy. and you listen to the people above you, and you tell the people below you what to do.
Right.
Whereas, leadership is the complete opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, I am here to work for you. I'm here to equip you with the tools that you feel that you need in order to be successful, not the tools I think you need in order to be successful, the tools that you need to be successful. How can I
Mm-hmm.
equip you with those? How can I support you through it? It's not about scolding someone if they make a mistake. It's about picking them back up and
Mm-hmm.
encouraging them to keep trying and to keep at it. I've been very fortunate in my career to have learned from a number of pretty amazing leaders, and
Mm-hmm.
um, it you learn different things about different people, and the style that you find to be most effective, and
Mm-hmm.
pulling pieces from different people around the type of leader that I want to be. And I'm very fortunate to have learned from a lot of pretty amazing people,
Mm-hmm.
that have allowed me to get to where I am today by not being a manager,
Yeah.
but really, caring about the team, and doing whatever I can to help them. It's a concept called servant leadership.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you're not here for me, I'm here for you. And the just that mindset and that mentality, what that actually does to drive actual business results and
Mm-hmm.
KPIs and
Yeah.
productivity, is actually quite phenomenal,
Mm-hmm.
because it's the individual doing the work that needs to feel like they can do it, and that if they make a mistake, I'm not going to sit here, I'm not going to use it as a stick to beat you with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm, we're I'm going to pick you up. I'm going to help build you back up, and encourage you to keep at it and to keep trying.
Yeah. And I think that's all amazing stuff, Justin. I love hearing that, and I like to I try to do the exact same things at work. And what the biggest pieces is that I didn't hear you say, but also for myself. And I guess this is about making about myself on this one too. But I find when you can switch from that managerial viewpoint to a leadership viewpoint like that, Justin, and one of the biggest things you pointed out to that switch is genuine care about the people that you're working with. What that does, in addition to all those positives you already gained, but it also allows you to, now you're not just learning from your own mistakes. You are so heavily invested and you care about the employees that now you've now expanded your learning from just yourself to now, like you said, what do you say, 60 employees. Now you are learning from not only yourself, but you're investing in all these other people, and you're learning, and you're, it's back and forth, and your growth curve shoots up so exponentially with just a simple change in mindset that it's so powerful. And then that feedbacks, because the more you learn from all these people, the better you can be there to be for them, right? And you might learn something really key from one employee that will help you work with another one, right? And learning how to bounce personalities, and how you can do it. It goes so far for what you want to be, and how you want to be, and just in growth, getting better in one area, you get better in all areas, right? If you really try and learn like that at work and be a leader at work, that spills over into the rest of your life. And now you're doing that with other people, and now you're trying, you want to be there for your friends, you want to be there for your family, you want to help them succeed, you want them to help be better. And now whatever relationship you have, whether it be work, whether it be personal, whether it be something in between, you're now learning from everybody. And now you've essentially just help yourself level up 2 or 3 times without even having to do anything other than change your viewpoint, right? That's the only thing that really changed. But with that change takes that genuine care, and I think that is one of the biggest things that people can't make that shift, Justin, from managerial to leadership, is because they struggle with that genuine care. And I think because of that, this is just, now I'm going past that point of just my own speculation. I think a big part of that is that in society today, there's not a lot of people that love themselves on a deep level, and it's really hard to have that genuine care when you don't think you deserve that yourself. And I feel like that is one of the biggest pieces holding us back. And it's almost goes back to right at the start of the conversation talking about mental health. I think that is a big piece. And if you want to be able to do that work as a leader and be a good leader, you have to do the work for yourself, and you have to watch your own mental health and make sure that you can be there and have enough care for yourself that you can care for others, and then you can be that leader that they need you to be. And I think that's something that if people want to make that mindset switch from the manager to leadership, probably the first place to start is working on yourself and making sure you're at a point where you can bring that to others.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. You have to be in a good place yourself before
Mm-hmm.
you can be that good place for others.
Yeah.
If you're and I, to not kind of divert this away from like the core kind of underlying thing is, I mean, you have to have that self-awareness to recognize when you are not in a good place.
Mm-hmm.
um, be able to pick up the signs in yourself. When am I getting angry? Am I getting upset? Am I getting
Yeah.
impatient?
Yeah.
And to be able to pick up on that in the moment. I mean, I've had some conversations with a number of people, personal life, professional life, across the spectrum, where conversations will get, they'll get a little emotional,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had to work very hard at being able to identify that,
Mm-hmm.
because it's something that you have to kind of practice. Reading
Definitely.
your own, you know,
Cues.
your blood pressure. Are your palms getting sweaty? Is that feeling when you talk and talk and talk, and you kind of get that pressure in your lungs. It feels like you can't breathe, but you keep
Mm-hmm.
breathing, and it's like, am I getting this? Am I feeling myself developing, an increased anxiety levels? And to be able to pick up on that and
Yeah.
recalibrate yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I've had conversations with people that just get absolutely, incredibly emotional, and they get
Mm-hmm.
angry and passionate, and I kind of get, a little taken aback by, like, whoa, 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 like, calm down. Then they'll be
Yeah.
like, I don't need to calm down. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Like, I during COVID, I subscribed to that master class,
Mm.
and the first one that I took was a negotiation course from and he was the ex international hostage negotiator for the FBI. His name's Chris
Wow.
Voss, and and he was sharing some of his learnings, um, you know, rooted in psychology around
Mm-hmm.
negotiation skills, and about how you can really not only understand people's motivations by not what they're saying, but how they're saying it, and the
Mm-hmm.
body language, the tonality in their voice. Where he said he actually has three different tones of voice. The first one is this right now. We're having a casual conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to sell you on anything. I'm not trying to diffuse a situation. It's just, you know, I'm just sitting here with my can of beer, just, having a conversation. But
Mm-hmm.
and he changed his tone of voice depending on the situation. So if he was trying to convince someone of something, you could immediately tell the increased enthusiasm in his voice. But
Yeah.
rarely, as an international hostage negotiator, do you
Do you
have to
need that one?
have this level of energy to really send your point home.
Yeah.
But then, in different situations, you really needed to calm somebody down.
Mm-hmm.
And how he calms people down was he used what is called his late night radio host voice,
Oh yeah.
where it's calm, it's smooth, and it's
Mm-hmm.
slow. And it's amazing how your tone of voice then impacts the other side's tone of voice,
Yeah.
because it's human nature to match the tones of voice and the body language of people around you.
Yeah.
So you can actually use the tone of your voice to influence the emotion of the other side,
Mm-hmm.
which is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to me to I took a negotiations class in university in the business school, and I didn't get much out of it if I'm honest. But it's funny to when you're saying those things. Uh, I didn't realize, but I have that thing at work, right? I have my radio voice. When people get that agitated, I have a different tone of voice. I have so many different tone of voice. It's funny to hear that. I didn't ever take a course on that, but it was natural. It's from watching my dad, to be honest, of watching him, how he, I got to watch him from the time I was this tall to the time I was, 18 and went off to university to try and learn myself of how he dealt with people and got to watch that. And it's funny how you don't realize what you do and don't have access to in terms of like learnings. When I got to the business school and I got to see how much people didn't know just off rip, that I got to learn. I didn't realize how, I thought everyone learned these kind of skills, but it's how much I'd learned from my dad and all that. And then walking in to see these kids, in that negotiations class, of learning these things that I know clearly in the real world do not work. And to watch them just, take it hook, line, and sinker. It was so funny. And then another thing I heard you say was just how much of his ideas were based in psychology. And I think one of the biggest things over the last couple of years of coming into the workforce, and I probably use Psych 104 and 105 that were my science prereqs for business, in business, more than 90% of the business courses I took, right? Like, it blows my mind that these, Psych 104 and 105 are so important. How is that not a class in grade 12 that's a mandatory like home ec, right? The psychology of how your brain works, and cognitive dissonance, and all those like traps you can fall into that are so obvious. Dunning-Kruger, like all these very basic psychology terms that can help you navigate life so easy, and business and everything. They just help in so many areas. But how are we not teaching this to the kids? Do they think it's that much more advanced? But I don't think that much difference between grade 12 and first year university when you take these courses, that you couldn't, the concepts aren't that mind blowing that they're that much that you couldn't have a grade 12 student really understand them. Or if you broke it down and started teaching it earlier, so you just kept the higher level concepts and tried to get people down to it, it just seemed like it would be so much more, you'd have such a more educated and healthy society, right? Think of mental health, of just understanding the tricks that your mind can play on yourself, right? Imposter syndrome. I talk about imposter syndrome on every single podcast I have, right? But it's such a huge piece that people don't even realize until they realize what it is, and that everyone has it to different degrees. You don't know how much that controls your life, and it's a good thing, right? If you understand it, it can help keep you humble and keep you motivated to get better all the time. And that's its function, right? Evolutionary, that is its function. But if you let it lose control and you let it run your life, now you can't even move forward, right? It inhibits so much of what you do, and you second guess everything you do. But that'd be a very easy topic to add in. Just even if you added that little part to a health class, would just be so much better, the way I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, the list goes on of things that would have added an incredible amount of value to be taught in high school, or if not high school, at least somewhere that has that same level of reach. Because I mean, there's a lot of these skills that can certainly be taught that just aren't, that are so much more important than half the stuff you get taught in high school. I mean, I work in real estate secured lending. So my team, underwrites mortgage applications. So
in English, if people want to, they want to go on a venture, but they want to put some sort of capital up against it, mostly houses. Is that what you're doing?
Yeah. So I mean, so real estate secured lending is the fancy word for, I mean, if you break it down, real estate, houses, secured, meaning the house is collateral, and lending is lending. So I mean, in English, what that would mean is we do
English.
Purchase and refinance transactions for houses, residential real estate.
Yeah.
So if you're buying a house, if you're selling a house, if you're upsizing, downsizing, need to restructure some debt, to like pull equity out of your house to pay off some credit card debt or other, I mean, the list goes on, but basically any type of lending using residential real estate as security. So mortgages.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
And I mean, seeing like, and I don't want to sound like the guy that had all the answers coming into this, because that could not be farther from the truth. I mean, my mom had always taught me, pay your bills on time, and you'll be fine. And I grew up with a single mom. We, she did pretty well for us. I mean, considering the circumstances, she owns her own house. She got it paid off. That single income. I played hockey my whole life, and that is not cheap. The equipment, the travel, the hotels, the meals, the gas, that is not cheap. And I mean, even me to this day, like looking back, I still don't know how she was able to make that work, but she did. And one of the things she always taught me was, we don't have much money, but I've got really good credit. And I was like, well, how does that work? Like,
Yeah.
and she's like, well, having money is one thing and having wealth is one thing, but showing people that if you say you're going to do something and then actually do it, like
Yeah.
there's also a lot of value in that. Like if you take out a loan to be able to make your payments on time,
Mm-hmm.
not miss a payment, if you have a credit card, are you making the minimum payments or are you paying it off every month? Like there's a difference there, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of how you build a credit. And this was like a 5-minute conversation. I don't even know how old I was, and my mom probably doesn't even remember this either, but I remembered it, and
Mm-hmm.
thankfully I did, because um, there's so many people out there that don't recognize the value of maintaining good credit.
Yeah. I
And we've had to have a number of pretty difficult conversations with some people that, based on their level of net worth, probably thought that this was a slam dunk mortgage approval for way more than they were actually able to afford.
mm-hmm.
Um, and had they, received some half decent formal education on personal finance,
Mm-hmm.
probably wouldn't be needing to have that tough conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And when you look at it, if you don't have that 5-minute conversation that you had with your mom, Justin, you're really SOL, because I went through I got a business degree and I was still woefully ignorant of all the different things that come with credit. I listened to a podcast. It was probably an hour and a half podcast. Just this lady had her money guy come on and just explain this to people, because of exactly the issue you just said. People can be 50 years old, not even realize the very basics of what credit is. And it opened my eyes to so many different things that I was doing wrong. It's like, holy man, how can I come out with a business degree and not even understand this shit? Like, holy man, imagine people that are the most, they learn how to balance a checkbook maybe in home ec, if you're lucky. That's about the financial literacy level that we're coming out of high school with, right? And then you
Yeah,
expect
I
people to
mean,
be
you go to university to get a business degree, you don't know how the credit reporting system works. You don't know how to, I could read a set of, publicly traded business financials inside out and backwards, but you ask me
mm-hmm.
to fill out my own tax return and I'm
Yeah.
screwed.
Uh-huh.
Um,
It's so
you
funny.
talk about, you hear all these get rich quick schemes, and, you know, whether it's the pyramid schemes or the whole get rich quick, and
Multi-level
you know
marketing.
but you never hear about how should the risk profile of an investment portfolio change over the time horizon that you're investing, and
Yes.
how should a 20-year-old investor act differently from a 40-year-old investor,
Yeah. What
from a
kind of risk
60-year-old,
can you
from an
take? Yeah.
80-year-old. And I mean, you learn about stock prices and how to build that minimum variance portfolio,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't tell you how to adjust that strategy over the long term. They equip you with the tools, but it's that practicality piece, that how do I take this
It's
knowledge and take the tools and bring it into the real world and actually use it to apply it and to gain value out
it's
of
the
it.
ex-
Like
it's the
that whole
experience.
link was totally missing.
Yeah, it's experiential knowledge versus like that text-based knowledge I was talking about earlier, right? That's why it was such a revelation when I heard that, because it made so much sense to me just intuitively of these things that I'd seen, right? When people don't have that real experiential knowledge of it, you just get the tools itself. And I feel like, I don't know if I just talked about this on the last podcast, but I feel like that is also a big issue that we have with this COVID stuff. Instead of teaching people the actual ins and outs of how a virus works and transfer and like how masks work and what they're effective against, what they do and don't, instead of that, we just said, oh, well, people aren't smart enough to understand. We're just going to give rules. We're just going to tell you 6 feet away and we're going to tell you these kind of things. And now people, not only does that increase the fear because you don't have an actual understanding, but now you're basing off those rules and you're you're spreading misinformation on how you interpret these rules instead of actually having the knowledge be based and well understood by everyone. I know that's complicated by how quickly the information was changing and the lack of information at the start, but as it came out, this was never put out there, right? And there was never people coming out and trying to explain to people, people will think they're safe standing in a 6 foot wide by 2 foot by 6 foot tall or whatever box where you're in them, but I'm 6 feet away from this guy. It doesn't matter. It's all about, air density and currents and ventilation and so many of these things that if we started to explain to people, but I just feel like instead of that, because that's more difficult, like we kind of said with the Black Lives Matter stuff, is it's way simpler just to give people easily shareable, here's your thing. You share this black square, you try and shop at black owned businesses, and now you've done your job and you've helped. But I didn't see any real solutions. Where's police reform in that, right? Like there's so much of them that in effort to make things easy and palatable, we're not making real change, or we're not accomplishing the real goals that we're setting out to at the start. And I feel like that is where, I don't know if that needs to be an overhaul in the education system, or just as a society, we need to understand the differences more so in how we learn and the different learning styles, and, try and create more of that experiential learning at all levels for all these things that are important, right? Whether it be this or whether it be all these places where you do it. It's just, I feel like we fall back on just having people, well, if you wanted to learn about it, that's on you. You got to read this up and you got to do the work, instead of on those areas where you would be learning it, actually making sure that understanding is making its way through and that people are coming out of it, right? Like there were so many times in classes, Justin, that I passed on paper and I passed the test for, but I didn't really have an experiential knowledge of them, right? I skipped all the classes and I didn't go, and I know that, right? And
It's too much time at Duke's for you.
Too much time at Duke's, exactly. But there's no. I only did that because there was nothing disincentivizing me away from it, right? I went to every class the first year. I went to most of the classes in second year. Third year, by third year I'd figured out which ones I have to and don't have to, and by fourth year, I'd figured out even the ones that I probably should go to, how to get away with not going to them, right? But if you leave those loopholes, people are going to take them, right? And I feel like the biggest cause of those loopholes is that there isn't an actual gate to making sure you experientially understand the knowledge that you were supposed to. All you have to do is be able to repeat it on the test and answer the multiple choice, or write down some words that make it seem like you did, right? And I feel like that's a big issue, and I don't know how we solve it, but I feel like that's where podcasts come in. So now I do a whole degree of that bullshit. I come out of school, I know a lot, I learned a lot, but I'd say I learned more running the LDL than I did in business school, right? Like in terms of actual experiential knowledge of how to work with people and how to hire, how to fire, how to deal with people that are angry, like you said, how to talk people down, how to get people fired up, how to get people to want to lead or want to follow, sorry, right? Those are all good skills. But then I walk out and I find podcasting where these lessons are less concentrated. You might have to listen to a 3-hour podcast of, dick jokes and laughter for 3 hours, which is enjoyable, don't get me wrong, to take the one or two real learnings and lessons out of it. But because it's couched and they tell a story of how they got around and how they made those learnings, they stick so much deeper in your brain that you don't forget them. And now they're ready to pull. And now it's not something you just learned. And I feel like that is something that over the next decade, I think we're going to see this long form and actual breaking it down to the experiential, because it's so much more palatable. I would just much rather sit for 3 hours and listen to two really, really smart intellectual people go back and forth and bandy ideas and come up with solutions. And just maybe you won't pull 100% out of it, but you might be able, even if it's just 20, but 20% of really concentrated ideas that really hit you and struck you in a way that they're going to stick and they're going to keep going forward. I think that is what we're going to see moving forward in more of these ideas. And I think that's what was so powerful about these learnings when the Black Lives Matter movement, first kicked off, and I went down that rabbit hole of trying to find voices that were in that medium that I liked, that, long form. Let's have these uncomfortable conversations. Let's, because we have 3 hours to, come back and decide and couch them all in a little bit of, understanding before you get into it, that this is a uncomfortable conversation. I think, I can't remember who said it, and this isn't the right words. It was way more eloquent than this, but it was something like, all uncomfortable situations all uncomfortable solutions require uncomfortable conversations, or something, right? Or solutions to uncomfortable problems require uncomfortable conversations. And I feel like there's an attack on these uncomfortable conversations because they think that the discussion itself is going to, cause more harm than the possible solutions that would come out of them will gain. And I feel like that's a backwards way of looking at things. If you have a discussion, you come up with ideas that if they're the wrong idea, you should be able to be comfortable enough in what is right and what is righteous, maybe more so than right, to explain that and bring people back onto your side. And if you can't, that's your failing, right? If I understand that the Black Lives Matter movement is important enough to me, I should be able to explain it to you in whatever way I want to do, to make it understand the spirit of what it's about and what we're trying to accomplish, right? You shouldn't be gated by how you go about explaining that. You have to explain that in this exact way. That is what I saw, right? And when I hear these people, and one of the biggest things that went out to me was probably the 2-3 weeks after, I can't remember who had brought this up, but they went on the actual live. They went on the actual Black Lives Matter website and pulled up their core values. And that's where I brought up the thing about the attack. They said that the nuclear family is a racist institution. They said that using logic is racist. They said using, there's a whole bunch of things, but essentially it was science. It was an attack on science. And I feel like I see where it's coming from, and it's coming from a good place, because all of these ideas of, progress are all based out of science and modern progress, and people barring certain groups from these super powerful tools that move society forward and keeping them for themselves, right? Traditionally, if you want to look at the United States and their area there, it's, gating the institutions away from the minority groups and keeping them for themselves, right? The universities is knowledge, the nuclear family, but that doesn't make those tools themselves racist. That means gating them away from certain groups is what's racist, right? And I think seeing that really scared me, because I think the solution in my head of what would be best is to take those are very powerful tools, right? The nuclear family, that's a very powerful tool. Logic and reason and the scientific method, all very powerful tools. Let's spread those as far as wide. Let's get those into these, minority cultures. Let's try and do everything we can to make sure they have every tool to succeed just as much as everybody else. And then let's see, because now we're breaking down, gating them away, and increasing the actual human capital that we can bring of just, making everyone in society be as smart and as educated as possible, and as do fully not potentialize, fully realize, right? Just give every person, there's so much that we get from all these cultures that are being downtrodden, being held down, and I agree with that. But I feel like the solution shouldn't be, let's take these tools away from everybody and nobody move forward. No, we shouldn't be gating them away from people. We just need to make sure that everyone has access. As many people have access to the scientific method and rationality and logic and two-parent households, the more we can bring that to every culture around the world. Doesn't need to be gated to one thing, right? Because that was how I got into this stuff. I had the same realization as you, Justin, of, oh man, everyone says the States has this big problem. And then, and I was kind of a little bit probably on my high horse and thinking, oh yeah, this is the States problem. And I'm just kind of looking up on my pedestal in Canada of how they can come to solutions and trying to do my part up here. And then, diving right back into, man, we do the exact same thing, and we keep these tools away from people, and we're not, our goals in order to help are not requiring us to bring these tools on a big enough scale to the people that need them, in my opinion. And then to see not only that, but then the other side attacking against those tools really scares me. And that's what I was saying. And, I believe in the cause and the movement, but I think the methods of getting there can actually cause more harm than good, and are actually very dangerous ideas to play with.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I just thought of, kind of listening to you go through that, is a few weeks ago, might even have been a couple months ago, one of my friends asked me what my opinion was on the Edmonton Eskimos changing their name to the Edmonton Football Club, or the name to be determined.
Yeah.
And my answer kind of blew her away. And my answer was that I don't have an opinion on it. And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, well, I don't have an opinion on it. She's like, well, why not? I was like, because it's not my opinion. If I had an opinion, my opinion doesn't matter. And I think the whole reaction of how this all played out was the perfect example of the society we live in, where everybody's got an opinion that seems to be equally as valid, no matter how you're actually, can credibly speak to that. And how there's this dichotomy, you're either for it or you're against it. You're either right wing or you're left wing. You're either a liberal or a conservative, a Republican or a Democrat. Like, what if I were to tell you that I don't associate myself with any political party? I just kind of call it as I see it. I think, from a social perspective, I feel like I'm very progressive, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that is true for a lot of our generation.
Yeah.
And being raised in a small town in northern Alberta, you don't always get to be able to think for yourself on a lot of those things. I know you
Mm-hmm.
referenced that earlier. um and I it's what I just thought of too is, so Chrystia Freeland, our new Minister of Finance, um,
Mm-hmm.
she was born in Peace River, and I don't know her personally, but I know some of her relatives. And as soon as I saw, that she got this opportunity, just the amount of my aunt actually shared on Facebook an article that Kicks FM, the radio station back in Peace River, shared about how Peace River right now is going through a twinning of the bridge going over the
Mm-hmm.
Peace River.
Yeah.
Um, and then they kind of took the angle of an interesting connection to the bridge situation in Peace River, that I think it was 2 or 3 days after our current bridge was built.
Mm.
2 or 3 days later, Miss Freeland's parents actually drove across the bridge, uh, from the west end down to the down, like the lower Peace River,
Yeah.
because that's where the hospital was, and Christia's mom was going to to deliver Christia.
Yeah.
And just kind of funny how we're still talking about the bridge today with the construction and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the last line on the article was, congratulations, Christia, the Peace region is proud of you. And for those that aren't keeping up with politics, Chrystia Freeland is a very prominent Liberal cabinet member. And last time I checked in northern Alberta,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the Liberals got a single vote, not to mention a single seat.
Mm-hmm.
And the one person, I don't know who it was, I've never met them, but the first comment on my aunt's Facebook post where she was sharing this article was,
Mm-hmm.
Peace Country's proud of you. I'm sure not.
Yeah.
And I hate getting into the political debates on Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
because it is a lose-lose. Like, nobody
Yep.
comes out of those on top. It's a perfect way to just roll around in the mud, and
Mm-hmm.
just the biggest waste of time that you'll never get back. But I thought to myself, um, I wonder if I would have replied to that comment with, I would like you to outline specifically the reasons that she does not deserve your pride.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, because I always have these thoughts and ideas in a half typed up response that I just end up
Mm-hmm.
deleting, because
Yeah.
it's
We
it's
all
just a
do.
waste of time, and
Yeah.
and it's just it's just petty. But
Mm-hmm.
I would just, based on the absolute lack of grammatical correctness in that comment,
Mm-hmm.
the improper use of homonyms and that you'll see on the internet, and just people have a way of really discrediting themselves without even realizing it. That if I
Yeah.
were to ask this individual, why are you not proud? Because she's a liberal? Like,
Mm-hmm.
she people are saying she's a journalist. She doesn't deserve to be the Minister of Finance. I was like, well, yeah, but I don't know for sure, but I think she was like the deputy editor for the Financial Times.
Yeah.
And like, you don't just get handed that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
not only was she a journalist, she was a damn good one, and she was a finance journalist.
Yeah.
like, like I mean, the work that she's been able to do, like around the USMCA, the new trade agreement,
Mm-hmm.
um, every situation she's been in. And I mean, if there's any Northern Albertas listening to this, they're probably not going to be thrilled with me right now, but I think she did an absolute bang up job.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm, like I said before, I don't identify as a liberal. I don't identify as really anything politically, but
Mm-hmm.
like, if you take that hat off, you take off that conservative hat, like, can you actually objectively, you know,
Oh, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Carry on.
Like
It's like nothing happened.
there might, like, you know, if you actually look into what she's done,
Mm-hmm.
you'd be able to make a pretty darn good case that every situation that she's been in, there has been some type of non-negative outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could sit here and hash out, and I would be in no position to actually do this, so don't take this as an invitation,
Yeah,
but
I hear
to
you. I know
hash
what you're
out
saying.
the you know, the pros and the cons
Yeah.
of what concessions were made to the US and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I mean, it wasn't a disaster. And, you know, a lot of people are, you know, comparing her and contrasting her truthfully to Justin Trudeau as a prime minister. And I shared a Facebook thing, that same
Mm-hmm.
article actually, that
Yeah.
was like, hell, like, you know, why stop at Minister of Finance? Like, make her prime minister.
Yeah,
I
should
mean,
do a better job.
you want to talk about, and this goes back to the leadership. Um, you know, Justin Trudeau is an incredible public reader.
Yeah. Yeah.
He is, you know, you talk about the tone of voice, the delivery of what he's saying while reading prepared remarks. There's
Yeah.
probably no other politician out there that is as good at that as he is.
Yeah. But I
But the
mean,
second he
but it's
goes off
phony.
script,
Oh yeah.
but the second he goes off script, you know, anything you ask, well, we've consulted with Canadians and we've really heard that, and then just, you know, goes on to
Yeah.
the liberal talking point of the day. And as he's talking, it's the you know, he stumbles over his words
Mm-hmm.
constantly. And you really lose credibility when you when you are perceived as somebody that can't actually articulate your own
Mm-hmm.
thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another big lesson that I had learned too, about how to not fumble over your words.
Yep.
And and it's actually really simple. All it is just slow down what you're saying,
Yeah.
because the human brain works at a much faster rate than the human lips and the human
Yeah.
tongue.
And
So
the
if
human
you
ears.
try, exactly, like if you try and keep up if you try and ask your mouth to keep up with your brain,
Mm-hmm.
there's no way that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And your brain doesn't work at a linear speed either. You know, you'll get onto something and you'll have all these ideas, and then 30 seconds later you totally forget about
Yep.
what you're talking about.
Happens all the
And
time.
yeah, and it's just that focus of deliberately speaking slower
Mm-hmm.
to give your brain a chance to catch up.
Yeah.
And by no means am I perfect. Like, now I'm probably going to go back and listen to this and count the number of times that I've fumbled over myself.
Oh
But
man. But we all do
but
that.
it's something that I'm very conscious of
Mm-hmm.
anyway, of trying to not let happen. And it helps build that credibility when you're in a situation where you don't really know what to say, but you also
Yeah.
need to invoke this sense of confidence. And it's something that I'm very focused on right now as I'm saying this.
Yeah.
And I'm not perfect at it by no means. I probably never will be, but it's something, just one of those things that
Yeah.
I consciously work towards.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter how good or bad you are at it. It's that you've attributed it as a value that you see in the world and that you'd like to see in yourself, so that you can start working on it. Right? You don't have to be perfect. It just means that you have to find the value in it and keep trying to get better at it.
And
And
how this all came about was a presentation that I did at work, where I asked my manager at the time for feedback.
mhm,
I asked her, you know, how did I do? What were your thoughts? And this is where I learned kind of another big lesson. It's called non-directive coaching, and
okay,
it's where it's a concept and it's a strategy where the leader isn't in the driver's seat in like a one-on-one coaching type of environment. It's all it really is asking questions to get the individual or the colleague,
mm,
to actually be able to identify within themselves what they want or need to change, and then also guiding them towards actually taking steps
mhm,
to improve it. And let me tell you, you can have a conversation like this with having zero idea of what actually needs to happen,
Mm-hmm.
but that will not have an impact on the outcome of the actual conversation. So like,
Right.
for example, right now, so I don't know much at all about podcasts,
Right.
but if I were to ask you, Nick, what is something about your podcasting that you feel is very strong? Like, what is one of your biggest strengths of being a podcaster in one sentence?
My vast knowledge of content, of just how much I've listened to over the years, just gives me a big wealth of knowledge to dip into from a lot of really smart minds that I look into, and be able to bring that out as best I can. I'm always working on it. Like you say, you're not perfect, but I always try and get better at, reaching in, and I have all this knowledge. I just have to know when and where to insert it, but I do have that big reservoir to pull upon. I think that's probably my biggest strength.
And then, so how do you continue to keep that fresh? Obviously, that doesn't sound like something that's a once and done. So what are some of the things that you do to really keep that alive?
I try to listen to lots of content to give myself that reservoir, make sure it doesn't run dry, right? I'm always trying to listen to new things, find new people that I respect. And then also, I think one of the biggest pieces I'm trying to do, because a lot of it is about being able to retrieve it. So I found that quantity and getting in front, doing as many of these podcasts as I can, so I get more comfortable and be able to pull from them. I feel like that keeps it fresh. And then I feel like I had one more point I wanted to get out to, but I lost it.
Okay. And then how often would you say you take in that content? Like, what does
Every
that
day.
frequency look like?
Oh, it depends. When I
On a
was the
tip
only one,
on a typical, say, week. On a typical week, how many podcasts would you listen to?
probably like 20.
And do you feel that those 20 hours prove to be a valuable investment in this venture right now?
I do.
Cool. That sounds great. Obviously, you're
Mm-hmm.
very dialed into what has made you uh,
Mm-hmm.
not only comfortable, but to a certain degree successful in
Mm-hmm.
being able to continue to attract people to your podcast. So
Right.
congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And the piece I was
And
missing there, Justin, that I wanted to bring up, because I do think it's a very important point. I listened to a podcast the other day about how the mind works and how we take in information. And I found, with that constant loop of always taking in more, as soon as I finished the last podcast, just right to the next one, your brain needs quiet time to be able to um, let all that information sink in. And I found that once I started meditating and giving myself a little bit more time of, maybe instead of going right to the next podcast, I give myself some time just to listen to music and just think on it. Or if a big realization hits during a podcast, is to pause it and just let it sink in, to almost talk it out to yourself and really let that sink in. And then that's been very crucial to my, actually, instead of, just listening to as much content as I can, trying to be more meaningful and directive with it.
so then I'm going to kind of flip the script on you now.
Yeah.
What is one thing about your podcasting that you feel like there is opportunity to further develop your skills in?
Oh, where do I even start?
For the
Being
I guess, just for the purposes of this, let's
Mhm.
see if you can think of something that you would be able to have an impact on, like, immediately. Like as we're talking through this, what's one thing that you feel like you want to get better at, like that you can right now?
Staying more connected with the person, as they're speaking their piece, and getting better at just getting a quick note down and not thinking too far ahead of what I want to get out and what I want to say, and more concentrating and staying in connection with what is being said to me. Being more, I guess, active listening would be the best way to sum it up.
And what do you think the biggest risk would be of not being able to further develop that? Like,
Um,
what do you think is the worst thing that could happen?
if I didn't continue to develop my active listening, I feel like it would become apparent to the listener that I was more involved in what I wanted to get out of it myself, and less caring about what my guest, of who I should be focused on, is saying, and that coming across to the listener and having that turn them off of the podcast and what it is, because it's supposed to be a back and forth conversation, not just one person trying to sound smart and get their points in.
Okay. So safe to say this is something, obviously it is,
Mm-hmm.
that you want to further develop and that you want
Mm-hmm.
to continue to get better at. Otherwise, obviously, you wouldn't have brought it up.
Right.
Do you know what you need to do in order to have a positive impact on that?
Yep. I need to get better at balancing when I can interrupt and when is the best time to just, if it's a small point that I can just interject and helps the conversation. I think also a big barrier to that is that we're doing through Skype. I think when you're in person with someone, you can interject just a small point into it, but it's finding that balance of, okay, I have all these notes. I have when we finish up this one, I have a whole host of things I want to go back through, all those things you said, right? But it's a matter of trying to keep good enough notes that I don't forget what I'm saying, but just one word or two word that can go back, not just to the one point you want to make, but the build on, because lots of my points, the way my brain works is it all flows together, right? Like once we're done this branch, I want to take you back because I think I can, button and tie a whole bunch of things that you said together, but I can't, once I start focusing on that, now you can go 10 seconds where I didn't even hear the last words you said because I was thinking about this whole, grand spiel I was going to get. And I think just keeping that in mind and realizing it when it happens, I feel like the biggest piece is, noticing it and just trying to keep, noticing where those errors are. I find the worst thing you can do is to be ignorant of your own errors. And as long as you know they're there and you're trying to get better, that's all you can do. And that's all you can ask of yourself. If you expect yourself to be perfect, you're just going to be disappointed.
So then recognizing that you want to improve your ability, not only of active listening, but, not interrupting people and allowing them the platform to deliver their thoughts and opinions and perspectives and everything. How will you know if your efforts are actually making a difference? How are you going to actually be able to measure the results of the investment that you're making into this?
I think a big part of it as a podcast is just your own being honest with yourself about the job you're doing and trying not to lie to yourself. If, when I get out of a podcast, I have usually a feeling if it was a good one or a bad one. And that's one of the biggest things, how well I listened and what came out of it. But then also because you can always lie to yourself. When I record a podcast, I send a copy to my sister and I send a copy to my girlfriend. I let them listen to it. And I try and say, what did you not like? I'm looking for I try and search out the criticism as much as I can to try and find that, because there's areas where you can be blind to yourself or lying to yourself about what an issue is. And I found over the last couple of years, I've gotten a lot better at that honesty and recognizing when there's something I don't like in myself so that I can start to work on it. But even still, like you say, you're never perfect at it. So I do try and also bring in the external forces to watch it as well and see, and that involves being honest with them too about the issues that I see in myself so that they can look out for it, right? Am I interrupting too much? I know I do that, right? Am I doing this? I know I do this. Can you look for that, right? And just being it's very vulnerable and it sucks to do because you don't want to, it's one thing to find the things in yourself that you don't like, but it's another to tell others about it. And I found that's, not the easiest thing to do, but it's important for it to get better, is I have to be honest with them about it too.
And so with the programs that you use to record and to edit and to publish, do you have any data at your disposal that you may be able to actually leverage to make that determination completely objectively on whether or not your efforts are actually making a difference? Like, do you get any kind of back-end reporting on maybe it's like the time that you were speaking compared to a time that I was speaking, or is there any like kind of any indicators or any pointers that may be able to assist you without having to rely on somebody else? Like, is there anything that you have within your control to be able to impact this?
Less so. I think the only one that I know what you're going for, and I can't think of, again, I'm new to this too, so I'm still learning what is at my disposal in terms of statistics and that, but it seems to be really all determinant upon how many people are listening. And that's been one thing that I've really been trying to stay away from, because I feel like that is not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to connect with people, and I don't want to ever base it on how many people are listening. I just want to, if the people that are listening are really connecting and really getting something out of it, that's way more important to me. And I feel like for it to be successful, that has to be the number one goal. And I try to, keep the other numbers, but I would say the actual number of people listening and how many people downloaded one episode versus the other would be the only real hard data that I could use at this point. I'm sure there is more data out there, more towards what you're saying, Justin. I think I'm just not skilled enough as a podcaster, far enough along the road to find those things yet. But that is something that I should be looking out for, because that's a great idea. I love where you're going with that.
And yeah, like I think, where I kind of want to, I guess, wrap this whole thing up is all I did there was ask questions.
Yeah.
Right. I did not know. I didn't know anything about podcasting. I didn't know anything about your back end software. But we were able to identify something that you wanted to work on. We were able to talk through what some strategies might look like. We were able to look to different indicators of success to know if this is actually hitting the mark. And you were able to think about the root cause of this in a different way.
Yes.
Because it's not about cutting people off, or it's not about the where we kind of ended on this wasn't about you focusing on cutting people off. It was about looking into it was about looking at the problem through a different lens and looking to, instead of just like, okay, I have to not cut people off and I need to not get 5 or 6 points across without letting the other person jump in. It was around, what are some hard indicators that are probably available to me, I just don't know about it. What type of research can I do to look into those different key performance indicators or KPIs to be able to actually identify if this is helping or not?
Right.
So it takes the initial problem, puts a completely different spin on it, and if this is something that you do end up like actually looking into, not only is it going to help with your ability to cut people off, but it's going to make you that much more knowledgeable about the software that you're using, and who knows what else you're going to discover that that you wouldn't have otherwise found.
Yeah. And I think that's awesome, Justin. And I think I, maybe not as explicitly as you just did it, but I think I do use those tools in my daily life with people at work and asking them, framing it in that way. And maybe just, I don't expand on it that far, but the first couple questions about, making the realization come from them. But what's funny to me is what you're doing by those questions is almost ensuring that someone makes the learning on an experiential level, going back to what we're talking about, the difference between those two learning, right? You are ensuring that by their response. I talk about this at work all the time. I love questions because you can understand, people can nod and say they understand something all day long, but you can tell by the questions they ask back to you if they really do have an understanding, or if they have partial understanding, there's maybe one more area you have to clear up. You can learn so much from the questions people ask, that creating an environment where people feel comfortable asking questions is a huge piece of being successful. And I find that at work, even on the highest levels, right? Like, my dad runs the company, he owns the company, and there's people at that level, but even creating it, it's awkward if he even has to say, well, I don't know that, can you explain? Right. But I found, as we've been going forward the last couple months, we're getting really a lot better at creating that culture as a company as a whole, of anybody can ask questions from the very top to the very bottom, and it's a good thing, and we're going to get better from it. There's no one's ever going to laugh at you, right? And those are all lessons I learned from Lister, and that sort of thing. And just to take that
there's one more question, and I want to make sure I get this in, because it is the most important question of all of those questions that I had asked you.
All right.
And going back to that side of really caring personally about your people, and wanting to help in any way you can. Obviously, I'm not your boss. I'm not your leader. I'm in no position of authority over you in any sense of the word. But what support do you need from me?
Right.
How can I help you?
Yeah. And that's a perfect way to end it. Yeah, I don't know if for this conversation, I mean, you've already helped by giving me that line of question. That already is the help. But I guess what would continue to help me is, as I explore that area where I want to get better, if I come to some more areas where I'm unsure, if you could be there for me to ask you more questions about it, and pick your brain, I would say that would probably be the only way that you could help me specifically on that one. But one step further I wanted to take it, Justin, that's kind of where I want to say, I said I love all that, but then one step further that I take, and you can't ask other people to do this, is just something, if you're doing it for yourself, you should do, is ask yourself one more question of, okay, so I know I have this issue with interrupting, I want to get my points out, what does that come from? And I'm very introspective, and I do this work all the time, so I know my major hangups that I have, and I know what that goes back to, of my childhood shit, of I have this weird sense in my mind of what I have to say matters more than others around me. And I am, just be quiet. Let me talk. I can say this better. I have that and I've always had that in me, and I have to work on that. And that's what that comes from. And that's what a lot of the interrupting comes from, that, thinking about my own thoughts instead of listening to the person because I value my thoughts over others. I know that is a huge thing that I struggle with and I work on all the time. But I feel like when you get to a point where you have an issue or something you need to work on in yourself, is trying to take it that one step further of what is the real root of where that comes from, right? What childhood, and I don't know if I figured that out. I think it was kind of always a sense I had, but I'm always trying to figure those things out and having those discussions, right? Talking with my girlfriend, talking with my parents. Well, where do you think that comes from? And doing that work, because I find that's one of the biggest things. Once you can find and if there's something about yourself you don't like, the first step to forgiving it is finding where it comes from, because it always stems from something, and it's usually in your childhood, and you can usually find what it is, or in how you grew up. Doesn't have to be your childhood, but once you understand that, you can forgive it, or you can at least, even if you can't forgive it, you can start to work around it, because if you don't have an understanding of what the issue is, you don't know what the right steps to take forward to fix it are. And I think that's something I always try and do, and it maybe isn't something you can ask your employees to do, because it's a pretty, the high level concept to do that kind of work. But I think for anybody listening to do that with themselves, I think anytime you see something and anytime you react, if you react angrily to something, if you react hurt, if you react, always ask yourself the question, what is that? What does that bring up in yourself? Where is that an issue on your own? And I think that has been a huge, when I learned that in myself and started doing that for myself, my learning curve and my growth started to skyrocket from that point on. So I think it's a huge realization that can really bring people forward.
Well, and you mentioned it too, like you thought about what that root cause might have been, and that's obviously critical to actually uncovering or finding what those solutions are to that maybe more superficial problem, without actually digging right into it. But you reminded me of another kind of strategy that we use at work. It's really like a change management philosophy, and it's how to successfully implement change in a person, in an organization. Really, the applications are quite broad, but what it all boils down to is a 5-letter acronym called ADKAR, ADKAR. And each of those letters represents a different element of the change management process. So the first A is awareness. Before we can ever dream of making any type of change within an organization, whether it's from a business strategy perspective or whether it's from you developing your own podcast, if before a change can happen, there has to be an awareness that a change is needed.
Right.
And that comes from that self-awareness. You had identified that you want to change how you kind of lead and navigate these conversations. So that's step 1, is awareness. Step 2 is desire, is the D. So I'm aware that a change needs to happen. Do I actually want to make this change? And you and I sitting here talking, it's an easy answer. Obviously, you want to make a change, otherwise you wouldn't have brought it up.
Yeah.
This gets a lot more complicated in a leadership position in a big company, because this is a very personal question. There have certainly been strategies in our organization that I was not completely bought into personally.
Yep.
But I had to make a personal decision on whether or not I was going to buy in anyway.
Yeah.
And in a leadership position, if you make the decision to not buy in to a broad organizational strategy, then you also have to ask yourself the question of, is this the right place for me in this organization? Because as a leader, I am paid to lead, and I am paid to navigate these changes and lead my team through it, because a lot of it is out of our control. The change is going to happen regardless of whether or not I think that it should. So if I buy into it, great. And trust me when I say, if you're not bought into a change and you try and lead it anyway, that is going to be crystal freaking clear. People are going to see right through you, and they will resent you for it. So that has to be part of that process, is making that decision, to have the desire to actually change.
Yes.
The middle initial, the K, is the knowledge. So do you know what you need to do in order to make that change?
Right.
So going back to our conversation, you know what you need to do. You need to take better notes as the person's talking. You've said that. You've said that you need to be mindful of how long you're speaking when you're speaking. It's not just about not jumping in. It's about being mindful of how long you're talking. And I'm
Right.
very mindful of it right now, but I'm 3 letters into a 5-letter acronym, and I know I just got to steam on through.
Yeah, of course.
ADKA. So the second A is for ability.
Right.
I'm aware that a change needs to happen. I want to make the change. I know how to do it. Can I do it?
Right.
You can. You have the physical ability to take the notes. You have the physical ability to watch the waveforms on the screen to see how much of this yours is doing and how much of this mine's doing.
Yeah.
You probably have the ability, whether or not you've figured it out yet, to go back and see how much speaking time I've had compared to how much speaking time you've had, and maybe then you start to keep track of that over the course of a few podcasts and see if there's any positive change in there. But all that boils down to is you know what you need to do, you want to do it, and you can do it.
Yes.
So ADKAR, the last letter is reinforcement.
Okay.
And this is the hardest and the longest part, because again, I know I'm repeating myself here, but you're aware that the change needs to happen. You want to make the change. You know how to change. You can change. So at this point, the change should happen. And what that last R is for reinforcement is, how are then you going to hold yourself accountable to continuing on in this new normal, in this new environment? And in a COVID situation professionally, this is the hardest part, and one that I'm still trying to figure out every day. Is we've had to make a lot of changes, whether it's working from home, whether it's replacing in-person meetings with video conferencing. There's a lot of changes that have had to happen that are totally out of our control. And speaking about our podcast example, it's a nice, easy one that's very easily connected to these points. But it's not only how do you hold yourself accountable, but at work, me as a leader is where that that support question comes in. Is what support do you need from me? And truly, like, if there is any support that you need from me, let me know. It's not going to cost me anything. It's just, you're a friend. I'm happy you asked me to be on, and if there's some value that I can return to you by assisting with this reinforcement however I can, then I'm happy to explore what that looks like.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. I loved what you said. I loved all the points, and I think I have a couple of things to add to them. But just before I do that, I just have to say thank you. I mean, and you've already helped. I mean, coming on and having to be able to talk some of these things through. I've been kind of hoping. I never want to say exactly what we're going to talk about on a podcast. I try not to, keep it pretty loose. But I was hoping that at some point we could stumble upon, because it is such a big change, and it's so much of my life right now, other than work, is investing into this podcast, and it's nice to be asked about the ins and outs and how it works, right? And that's a lot of how I do my best work, is having people question me on why I'm doing it and having me articulate the ideas. I have a lot of ideas in my head of how I want things to be, but until I articulate them, I don't fully understand them because I haven't been pushed on those, right? And I love to hear that. And a couple things just throughout that, I love the awareness.
As we were going through that, I saw you taking notes, and you probably saw the smile across my face every time I saw you make that turn. So that shows me that this commitment is real, which is great.
Well, I have enough notes here that I think I could take you back through probably the whole, maybe 25 minutes of what I wanted to say throughout your whole speech and take you back through it. But just while we're on the ad card, one of the biggest things, I love the awareness, because I think that's something that so many people struggle with, is the awareness of if a change needs to take place, right? In business, that's one thing, but I think personally, I mean, you can use that for your own personal development, that same ad card acronym that goes for business development, business ideas, and your own development, right? And I think that's the biggest piece that people can never get to the D car, because they can't get to the A, right? They can't get through that, and that's one of the hardest pieces. Once you're past that, it's pretty much easy sailing. And then the D, when you're saying desire, and when you said you've gone through some changes that you weren't totally bought into, and saw what it got to, I think something that's helped me throughout my business career is when you're forced into a situation where you don't have the ability, or not even, you have the ability, you don't have the authority, maybe is a better way to say it, to impact the decision making process. You have to buy in and then work your ass off so that next time a decision comes up, you do have the authority. And I feel like that's been something that I've been working to at work when I get frustrated with the direction things go because I don't have the authority to change it. It's okay. Well, there's nothing I can do. This is a decision it's made. Let's try and work this through. But next time a decision of this magnitude comes out, I'm going to be at that level where I can make my voice heard and I can impact the way it goes. And I find that having that in the back of my brain is always really good for that buy-in, because just telling yourself, I don't care about this, but I have to buy in. It's up to your own personal forward to if you do, but when you can, couch it with this, but next time this comes out, I'm going to work right. I'm going to buy into this so that I can show and grow my worth so that next time I can bring this change upon. I find that makes it a lot easier for me to actually buy in instead of just saying you're buying in, right? Because like you said, everyone knows when you pretend you've bought in and you haven't, it's very clear right from the start. And that brings you back to what you said about Trudeau being a great reader. I think I almost wanted to push back a little bit on that of just like,
I saw your face kind of cringe a little bit when I was about to give Trudeau a compliment. So it was, but then I kept talking, and you gave me the opportunity to kind of finish that thought, and I could see by the end, after having given me that opportunity to finish the thought instead of interrupting me, and that was before this whole come to Jesus conversation about about interruptions, but no, it's important to be able to listen to ideas that differ from your own, and not be so stuck in your ways that somebody can't come along and present a good point or a good argument that may be able to convince you otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a big piece of it too, Justin, is the ability to let go of your ideas. And right, like, because right now what I'm feeling is what I would love to do is go back, because I have something on Trudeau, I have something on what's her name from Peace River, and the Facebook post that your mom made in the comment that was made. I have something on all this, but what I have to get better as is I get so focused on all these points I didn't make that I'm not looking to make the points that are partial to the conversation now. And I'm always partial to wanting to go back for some reason, because I feel like, oh, I had all these good points I didn't get out, but it doesn't matter, right? Like, and I think it's something that is inside me where I'm worried that if I don't get these points, I won't have more. But like if I just sat there and had all these really good points to bring up on all these things, wherever the conversation goes, I'm going to have points where I can fit them in as they go. And I have to be less attached with the points I wanted to make. Right. Like,
well, it goes back to that subconscious thing that you mentioned too, about, valuing your own opinions. Sometimes, coming across as, and I know you're not coming from the place of genuinely thinking that your opinions are more important than anyone else. I know you quite well, and I know that's not how you actually feel.
right.
But you still have that awareness that this may be something that's seated in, whether that's your childhood, whether that's your upbringing, whether that's in, again, to that point of privilege, just being the straight Caucasian male that that grew up in an amazing family.
Amazing.
I mean, I know your father, your mother, and obviously Courtney, and one of the tightest knit families that I've ever had the pleasure of interacting with, and kind of seeing how that dynamic works. And I mean, so the family box is checked. You've been raised with a good work ethic. Your dad's run his own business, and you've had the privilege of traveling the world and seeing all these different places that a lot of people just don't have that opportunity.
Yeah.
So, I mean, not to say that it's overly surprising that you may feel that your opinion may have that certain weight. But I think even more impressive is that you have the presence of mind to actually be able to identify that and take active steps to mitigate that.
Right. And this is newer learnings, right? I didn't always have that. It was always within me, but I couldn't get past the A of being aware of it in my own self until probably after university, right? Like, and then as soon as you make that realization, you look back upon, say I made that realization at 24 years old, and you look back at yourself without that realization, just, the havoc that was left in your wake by that small, by not being aware and trying to curb that piece of what's in you, right? And I feel like and now that I started to have those kind of realizations, you have them more and more often. You learn these things about yourself, and as you start to see them more and more, you go, man, I wish I would have started this journey of personal growth earlier because I could have seen these things and done anything. But everyone works at their own different rates. And what it took for me, like I keep coming back to, was podcasts is what showed me that, right? I got to see that in other people and these people that I respected, but it just took, everyone learns differently. I think that's one of the first things we started this conversation with, is just, there's so many learning. Some people are visual learners, some people are audible learners, some people, learn really good from text. And I think, we know all this, and we've done studies and studies, and we refuse to enact the learnings. And
I just realized today, actually, literally this morning, as I'm laying on the couch scrolling Instagram or Facebook or something. Yesterday was a bit of a crazy day for me. Played 18 holes of golf, then had a hockey game, then biked to my friend's place to go sit in the hot tub for a couple evening beverages. My body is not used to that level of physical activity anymore.
Right.
So largely today was spent like an absolute vegetable on the couch. I left the house to go pick up some groceries and a couple beers, as I knew I'd be spending some time with you here tonight, but didn't get much done today. So as I was scrolling through Instagram, you know how the videos kind of pop up, and some are a little more value added than others, but what I noticed is I was kind of looking around my house. I think the cats were fighting or chasing one another or something, and I got distracted. I had my headphones in, so I was still listening to what the person was saying. But I didn't really, it didn't really register with me at all.
Right.
It wasn't until I looked back onto my phone and saw the captions that I felt like, okay, I'll remember this now. And I was like, wait a minute. I'm 28 years old. Did I just realize that I'm a better visual learner than an audio learner? That would have been pretty valuable going through university. And it literally just dawned on me today by the biggest waste of time known to mankind, scrolling, the depths of social media with no rhyme or reason to it, taught me that I probably need to see something to remember it as opposed to hear it.
And I think that's something I realized too, Justin, is I'm a learner in different ways with different, like, I feel like I'm a visual learner, I'm an audible learner, I have all these different ways, but it's almost different information requires different requirements on myself for it. And I feel like that's what I love about podcasts. If you want to listen to a podcast, I mean, if it's a high level my podcast obviously doesn't have this, and this is something I want to grow it into, but there's certain podcasts that I will not listen to. I will save till I get home and I will watch them. I still put them on 2x speed and I still cruise through them like I do when I listen to them. But
oh, that's a good idea. I've never done that before.
What?
The 2x speed.
Oh, Justin, that's my biggest thing. So I apologize to all the listeners that have listened to me say this about a million times. I think this is going to change the world. And it's funny because it goes back to one of these points. I have this big block of things that I wanted to say. That was one of them. So that was one of the biggest things I found when I started listening to podcasts. It's a skill that you learn, but you start with 1.25 speed, then 1.5 as you get comfortable, right? 1.75 up to 2.
You just keep cranking it up.
Yeah, and now I listen to content on 3x speed a lot of the time. If it's and I can cruise through, right? And then you listen to audiobooks. You can read a book. Like books, I find I can listen to even faster. But it's this huge thing where the mind can take in something like, I don't know the actual numbers, but just to keep things fair, because I think I know the ratios, say we can process 400 words a minute audibly, but we can only speak at 100, say. So like you have 4 times faster auditory engagement. And when you add a visual
download versus upload in the brain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But what you were saying earlier about slowing down how you speak and you try and speak. And I feel like people are always asking me, how do you talk so fast on the podcast? I can't even turn it up because you talk so fast to begin with. And it's because I'm always listening to things on like 2x speed. So I talk like I listen, but your brain, like you said, your mouth can't work at that speed but your ears can. Right. And I think that's a lesson. Everyone needs to slow down what they're speaking and speed up what they're listening to, because I feel like we're not pushing the limitations of what we could be taking on, right? That's when you asked how many podcasts I listen to in a week. That's why I listen to 20, because I listen to them on 2.5 to 3 times speed.
Well, I didn't say anything, but I was about to be like, "Holy shit, Nick! Like, you need to get a life if you're
Because
listening to 20 hours of podcasts in a day."
just,
But if
just
you're listening to 20 hours worth of podcasts in 8 hours, then obviously that's a huge
exactly.
difference.
That's a big difference. And that's right now, Justin, when my girlfriend's moved back and is now living with me again, I have a life. When she was doing her master's, so she'd come for the 4 months of the summer, right? And then go home. So there'd be 8 months out of the year where I'm in Grand Prairie, Alberta. I had no friends here. I'd go to the gym and come back and go to work. The rest of my day, and every time I'm driving in between, was podcast, audiobook, right? And I was just sitting there, taking all that in. And like you said, now I've learned now that I need quiet time to help digest those, and maybe at that time that would have been better. But I found like that 3 or 4 year span after I graduated to the time I'm at now to when I started my podcast, I learned so much and I took in so much information over those, like it's tens of thousands of hours of content. And it's not just the funny ones I listen to, it's also the history ones and these, life podcasts that are teaching these lessons. And I got to see how much I could get out of it and how much it changed me as a person, that it almost felt duty bound to try and bring all those little pieces of knowledge out to other people. And I would always be so jealous because I'd be like, oh, I'm learning a decent bit listening to all these people. But imagine how much a Joe Rogan is listening, having all these high level scientists on, having conversations with them. Like, my goal is always to be expanding my knowledge and growing my knowledge. That's why I was such a voracious reader growing up. I just love reading. I love knowledge. I love that stuff. And why would I not try to pursue a career where I could make money from having experts in their field come on and educate me? Right. That just seems like the biggest no brainer, that at the point that when I finally intellectualized it in that way, I realized, okay, there's no other option. I have to try. I at least have to try this. Right. And I think I can do well with it. I have that confidence. But then there's days where I don't have that confidence. I think I'm an idiot. Why am I doing this? I think earlier today I was trying to record an intro for the one I'm releasing tomorrow, and my girlfriend could hear me yelling at myself, "You're such an idiot. Why are you doing this? You can't even talk. You can't even say words, right?" And it's that roller coaster of the ups and downs of that sort of thing. And yeah, I agree that speed needs to be speed is very important in what we're listening to. And I do think that if more people get onto that, you know, practice that skill of upping the rate that they take in their content, I think it'll open the doors, because I think that's the biggest barrier. People go, well, I don't have 3 hours to listen to a podcast. Yeah, but if you can listen to it in an hour and a half, and you can, have 3 hours of a really either hilarious conversation or really in-depth and powerful conversation in an hour and a half, in less time than it takes to watch a movie, you just learned more things than you've learned in an entire university course at times, right? Like, there's certain ones, and that's why I think I brought this up on another podcast with Will Roosh. He's a teacher out of LA. And where was I going with that now? Shit, I can't even remember why I brought him up. I learned something from him. I've learned a lot of things from him, actually. And one of the funny things, actually, that ties back in another area that you were saying, when there was that post that your mom shared in Peace River, and that comment was posted. The one thing that Will does is he'll go on to maybe say like a Trump post. He's American, so he goes on to a Trump post, looks for someone and reacts. Someone that says one of those in a very similar way of uninvestigated thought thrown out there out of anger with not a lot behind to it. You can tell by the grammar that it's not really well thought out. And he says, genuinely, I'd like to discuss this with you. If you want to hop on to an Instagram live or just a phone call, and let's discuss it. And he'll also go on to the other side, right? Go on to a Biden post and do this when there's an uninvestigated thought, and he tries to do this. But one of the biggest things that you find is that those people that are putting out those uninvestigated thoughts don't want to discuss it. They don't want to be, they don't have points that they want to defend. It scares them away. And I think that points towards something. I think a big thing about investigative versus uninvestigated thoughts, I think uninvestigated thoughts are dangerous and hold you back, and investigated thoughts can be dangerous, can be scary, but it helps you move forward, right? It almost comes back to the A in ADKAR, I think. Awareness, right? It's the awareness of those issues, right? There's so much of life is just uninvestigated thoughts, and people being willing to put out uninvestigated thoughts. And I think that is where me and you differ slightly, on taking it all the way back to, there's times where you have no voice in an opinion. I think that is true when they're uninvestigated thoughts. But I think if you're willing to put in the effort to educate yourself on a subject, I think barring any willing participant to educate themselves on an issue, should be allowed a seat at the table, because the old saying, two heads are better than one. Why would you isolate yourself to only one group or one subsection to come up with answers if they can show, right? I totally agree with you that if you're just coming in with an uninvestigated thought, not from a good place, right? It has to be investigated and come from a place of come from a good place. Those two things, I think, always keep a seat at the table. And I think that's what hurts me, to see that all these people saying, if you're not X, you can't comment on Y. If you're not this, you can't comment on that. Because where I come from, I'd like to comment on everything, but I'm not going to comment on it unless I've actually done my research and I want to comment
Yeah,
on it.
it's like I at risk of going down another absolute
Mhm.
rabbit hole, which I
Mhm.
have a feeling this might turn into.
Right, and that's not where I wanted to take it back to.
It's going back to the thing about if you think this, you can't think that.
Mhm.
I think the best like modern day example of that is around like resource development
Yeah.
and pipelines. It's
Yeah.
like, how can you be pro Indigenous relations and pro treaty rights and pro cultural respect, while you also believe that that we need to develop our resource industry, that we need to get our resources to market, recognizing that pipelines are by far not only the most economic, but the most
Safest.
safe way of doing it.
Mhm.
How can you have those two opinions? And
Mhm.
my answer is short. It's, well, I don't know, but I do.
Yeah, exactly. It's easy.
I'm not gonna sit here and try and blow smoke about why I support both. I mean,
Mhm.
I would be pretty ticked off if Don Iveson, the mayor of Edmonton, or Jason Kenney or Justin Trudeau knocked on my door and said, "Hey, we're taking your backyard that I spend a lot of time maintaining, by the way.
Oh, I've seen it.
Now
It's
that
beautiful.
I'd be pretty pissed if someone came into my backyard and said, "Hey, we're going to screw with your land, and this
Mhm.
is land that has very little significance to me, other than I bought it 2 years ago with my
Yeah.
wife, and I have a tree planted in the backyard with a few of my grandmother's ashes. But aside from that, there's no history here. There's no
Mhm.
significance, and and for people to discount the frustration and the anger by these communities of not wanting projects to go through their land, which has
Mhm.
this significance. I mean, think what you want, but I have to take, you have to appreciate their point of view, and you have to recognize and
Of course.
empathize that if
Mhm.
someone did this to me, I'd be pissed. So
Yeah.
so that's that, because that is that situation.
Yeah.
But I also know, and I mean, I in university, I mean, you want to talk about changing educations, like we had talked about initially with my pharmacy
Mhm.
to business. Well, I was in university between the year 2010 and the year 2014.
11.
Technically, I threw an extra semester in there, but it was still in the
Mhm.
calendar year
Yeah.
2014. Um, but I was in university in a time where the price of oil was 120 bucks a barrel. The exchange rate, the CAD to US dollar, was about 0.85, 0.9. Like, it was
Mhm.
we were almost on par with the US. Oil was booming. Um, you know, Real estate in Alberta wasn't back to where it was in the early 2000s, but things were good.
Mhm.
So what is this, small town kid from Peace River, Alberta? Where does he want to take his business degree? Well, it's into energy.
Yeah.
I applied with, well, God, all of the big
Mhm.
hot dogs in that industry, the Suncors, the Shells, the um, all of them,
Right. Yeah.
Imperial, the list
Mhm.
goes on. I had applications in with each of them, and didn't get any sort of call back or anything, and that's kind of ultimately what led me to banking was the absolute crash of oil prices in
Mhm.
2014. And and I know I'm going down a rabbit hole here too, but one of my professors, which kind of ties us back to what we were talking about before, about the media and about differing
Mhm.
opinions, um, so his name's Andrew Leach. I think he's still a professor at the U of A.
Ah,
I think he took
I
a
spoke in class with
took a
him.
bit of time away because I think he just or is in the pursuit of getting his law degree as well. I'm not in touch with him personally. I
Mhm.
follow him on Twitter because it's fun to follow him. He's pretty
Yeah.
active on Twitter. But one of the biggest lessons he taught me and our energy economics class back in the day was whenever there was breaking news around an energy project, we would review a news article on it
Mm-hmm.
and we would pick that thing apart. And we would say, where are the biases? Is this like a left bias? Is this a right bias? Because obviously, like when you actually look at news from that lens,
Mm-hmm.
like it becomes very clear very quickly
Yep.
where those biases lie.
Mm-hmm.
So to be able to not just take in the information, but actually like criticize it and question it, um, probably up there with when you talk about, I mean, skills that aren't taught in
Mm-hmm.
school
Yep.
about how to think critically and not
Yeah.
just absorb this information and actually take it at face value.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, when you talk about this versus that or us versus them and this nuanced thought about how you can kind of be on two different sides of the same argument,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay, because it speaks to the complexity of the issues that our society faces,
Yeah.
particularly the energy indigenous relations one. I am so happy that I am not in charge of figuring out a solution to that,
Yeah.
because there, in my opinion, isn't a solution that is going to benefit both sides, and it kind of freaks me out to see where this ends up, whether it's from a
Yeah.
humanitarian lens, whether it's through an economic lens. I'm just happy I don't have to be the one that makes that call, because
Yeah.
you want to talk about losing sleep at night, on both sides. No matter what you do, you're screwed.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's funny to hear you bring up Andrew Leach because I took the same course. I think, or I was supposed to take a course with Andrew,
Might
and
might have been on my advice.
yeah, it might have. I think it was actually, and he was. He had to step away for the semester to it was when the NDP first got in. They were he was on the council that came up with
Yeah,
the carbon tax for Alberta and the
yeah.
plan for that. So we had a lady come in and teach that course for that semester, and she was the best professor I had in my entire university career. I had her for one course, that one semester, and she was incredible. I'm trying to find. I
I
can't
remember
remember
you.
where
I remember you talking about this on another podcast of yours
she
that I
was.
listened to.
Oh, she was so amazing, Justin. And she was in the industry for like 20 years, right? And she just came in to do a favor to Andrew and I'm really trying to find her name again in some old emails and stuff because I had reached out to her to try and find employees if she saw any rising stars in the school because she's still doing stuff around the U of A. After so I'm trying to really reach out and even not hopefully to get her on the podcast if she was willing, but if not, just to say thank you for everything she did. But I felt for a while, kind of the issue I told you earlier was, going into business school and seeing these guys that were getting great grades, but you could tell they'd never worked a day in their life and they didn't know actually how to compete with people. The way they talk to people was pretty, and just like, oh my God, but you're going to have such a rude awakening when you get into the real world. And all these classes, they would just, be quite rude to the professors and stuff. Things that were like, I just couldn't stand. There was one guy in particular and he had a little group of cronies and I just, I never said anything to him. I never got mad at them. If they asked me to talk to, I was always nice to them, right? I'm not a very conflict person. I was always a big teddy bear, so I never said nothing. But then to watch them try to pull that bullshit in her class, someone who had actually been out in the real world, and the way she put them in her place, and she saw the exact same thing. Because I felt like I was going crazy. I went through, this is probably my third or fourth year at this point. Is like I've been listening to these kids, talk back to profs and just all this stuff for how long? Am I the crazy one? Is that just how things work? You can talk like that, but that's not how I grew up in Slave Lake, Alberta. You talk like that, you get smacked in the back of the head. And just to
Yeah.
see her not physically smack him in the back of the head, but just to restore balance to everything. And then also she was a kick-ass teacher that really knew her shit, and really I learned so much from that. But just all that culmination, that was a real high point of my university career, and I just owe a lot to her. And I think it's funny that it was that same class that you put me onto. You haven't steered me wrong in a lot of ways over the years, Justin. I must say you've been pretty spot on with any places you've led me. I can't think of any off the top of my head that went sour. So I got to say thank you
Well, we'll try and keep it that way.
yeah, exactly. Keep up the
I can't promise. I know some of my thoughts and opinions can be a little out there, but I'll always try and steer you in the right direction, little Nicky.
yeah, and that was something that I've thought, I was hearing you echo some thoughts I've been thinking for a long time, Justin, is how often, to hear you say that you have a conflicted position on something. I have conflicted positions on everything. I can't even think of one example where I'm completely to one side or completely to the other. I'm always in the middle. There's always nuance to everything, but it feels like that position is being attacked. The middle position is what's under attack lately, and you can't be nuanced. Whether it's environment, whether it's any of these issues, you can't be in the middle. You can't try and see both sides and come to a better solution. But how often are the best solutions completely to one side or the other? 99 times out of 100, the best solution is going to be somewhere in the middle. It might be towards one pole or the other, but it's very likely not completely to the one side. So then
Well, I
why are
mean,
we keeping away from it?
it's like on social media again. The only people that ever post political stuff on Facebook are either the 1% on the left or the 1% on the right.
Mm-hmm.
The 98% in the middle, they just shut up because
Yeah,
they just don't
exactly.
get into it because
I've never, I've
they're
always,
like you and I. It's like it's not worth it, and it's
yeah.
people just get into these pissing contests on Facebook, and 80% of that stuff you'd never say to that person's face. And if you are, that's a different conversation because that is that's
Mhm.
something else.
Yeah.
But I mean, to hide behind this keyboard and to just speak this absolute nonsense, like
Mhm.
the person that had commented on my aunt's post, like,
Mhm.
I'm not proud of Christopher Freeland. Like, really? And
Yeah.
like, if there was an actual legitimate reason, she probably just would have commented that instead of, I'm not
Yeah.
proud of her.
If she had done
Probably
enough,
just
if she had done enough research to have a real opinion, Justin, she wouldn't have posted at all. That's my big thing. If anybody I respect their intellect, like all the people whose intellects I respect, I've never seen do that kind of posting that you said that you say. Just
and for the record, research is not getting info off Facebook.
oh, of course, all right. That's or
Just
even
so we're clear.
or even the news, watching any news channel that's on TV. If it's on TV, it's pretty much, biased to the point where you can't really take what it is.
Where do you get your news from? I'm curious. Because I
I,
agree. I mean, you watch any mainstream
mhm,
source. I mean, in the U.S., you've got your CNN versus Fox. In Canada, you got your CTV
yeah.
versus your CBC. Um, I'm curious as to like where you get your info from.
So, um, in terms of my info, I get most of it from podcasts. But then in addition to that, there's a few independent journalists that I pay, $5 a month to, and they email you direct articles that they write on subjects, and it's just them, and I trust their. Usually it comes from them having some sort of long form, either YouTube channel or podcast that I listen to, and after enough time, I can trust their opinions. You know, you can only listen, like, if you listen to somebody for 3 hours a week or 6 hours a week for 3 years, you're going to know that person pretty well. How many of your closest friends, Justin, do you talk to, for a full on actual meaningful conversation 6 hours a week? Not very many, I would guess, right?
Outside of like my wife, probably nobody else. She's probably the only
Exactly,
one.
right? But the way you know your wife, because you do put in that kind of time, you can get to know these other people, and then from those, if it's a journal, so ever that I get to that point where I trust what they say, and even then, and it doesn't even need to be 100%. You can trust what they say to be true to them once you understand them, even if they are a bit biased. You know where their biases are, and you know what to look out for, so you can pull an accurate assessment of that. So I have probably one or two independent journals that I just pay. Substack, I think, is the program they use to call, and they just email you their articles and stuff. There's a few independent journalists that just have YouTube shows that they put out, just constantly throughout the
Yeah,
day. They'll put out little clips or more long form ones, and I listen to those. And then when this COVID hit, I tried to go back to the mainstream media and turn on a couple of news channels because I felt like I owed that to my employees at work, that I need to be up to date on the latest
yeah,
restrictions and
yeah.
guidelines. And I went into a serious depression, Justin, just from that, of hearing them lie and hearing Trudeau come out and not answer any questions and just be the most phony, just clearly reading off a page and just being a phony about everything. It just made me really sad, and I had to end up turning it off. It was just, but it really opened me up because I had completely disconnected from that until COVID hit. And then to go back into it thinking, oh, it's probably not as bad as I remembered, and it being so much worse, it's just
Oh
made,
yeah, it was bad. It was bad.
it just hurts to think of how many people out there don't realize that this is drivel because they grew up in an era where this was the news and it actually stood for something, right? If you grew up in the 70s and the 60s where the news was the news and you could trust it, that's a hard thing to get away from. That will rock your entire sense of being, to know that the thing that you depended on for your source of normalcy and accuracy in the world has gone to shit. I can't blame someone for holding on to that and being willing to open up, or intentionally being ignorant to it if it's going to mean that, or, you know, having to reshape their whole outlook on life. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, and
but
like bias is in and of itself isn't a bad thing.
right.
It's when that's all that you consume.
Yes.
Like on a
Or, or,
CNN, like
or,
like
or
CNN
it's
CNN
either,
versus Fox. You've got your clear left versus
uh
your right.
hmm
And if all you ever watch is CNN, then anything that Fox News says is laughable. Like, it's
hmm
actually, how can you even have that view? And the exact same is true the other way around. If you
yeah,
only get your news from Fox News, you'll turn on the CNN evening news, and you'll either start laughing, or you will get so angry that
yeah.
you will not even be able to, like, you'll have to change the channel. And and the same, I think, is true in Canada to a lesser extent. I mean, CBC is pretty left, and I think that's fairly clear. And I think CTV's, really the only other one we've kind of got. So
But
it's
that's what I
kind
was
of more
watching, Justin. That's exactly
it's
what's going
it's
on.
kind of in the middle ish, I guess you could say. But
I thought it was
I
pretty. I thought it was pretty left too. When I started turning, because that's what I went to was CTV. Justin, when I wanted to put on, I just leave it running in my office, and I'd turn on the volume on when I was in there, turn the volume off when I wasn't, and it was terrible. It was completely biased. They wouldn't say throughout the entire era of Trudeau just kind of hiding, giving his one daily address. They didn't criticize him once until when he had that big gap between saying, when they asked him about Trump, and he had that big weirdo 20-second where he just didn't say anything. Remember that? That
yeah,
was the
yeah,
one time that was the one time they criticized Trudeau throughout this whole pandemic and his bungling of it. And it was because,
yeah. I mean,
but it was the one criticism they said of him, Justin, was that he didn't jump to criticize Trump fast enough. That was the one criticism throughout the whole
yeah,
pandemic. And I'm
yeah.
not saying even if he did an amazing job, there'd definitely be some criticism. It was just there was a lack of information
What's
for you to even
Yeah.
there was no possibility of doing it perfectly. But to say that he did nothing wrong was absolutely ridiculous to me. I
Yeah, I
couldn't
mean,
handle
there's always a balance,
it. Yeah.
and feedback always should have a balance.
Mhm.
Nothing is perfect, and nothing is the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can kind of think of it through either of those lenses, but realistically, everything
Mhm.
is balanced. I mean,
Yeah.
relatively speaking, if you were to ask me on April 15th, or like earlier days in the pandemic, if you were going to ask me, what's Trudeau's response so far, like, in a relative sense,
Mhm.
I'd say it's pretty darn good.
Hmm.
We were quick to provide government support. Is that government support the right way of doing it? I mean, well, obviously that's up for debate, but
Mhm.
the government was quick to step in, for better or for worse, to help their
Yeah.
people.
Yep.
A lot of countries around the world didn't do that. The Serb system has its faults. Some of them are incredibly large.
Mhm.
Um,
But also there's a
I
bunch of
think I
huge
think
positives.
I think there's going to be hell to pay next year,
Oh, yeah.
when all of these people that applied and received for CERB realize, A, that it's taxable income, and you haven't set aside the offsetting tax burden that's going to come into
Mhm.
play next year.
Mhm.
B, once the CRA realizes that you actually weren't meeting the criteria from an employment perspective, you didn't, because CRA knows everything. I mean,
Mhm.
as a business leader yourself, you'll know that you have to submit, employee T4s to CRA. You have to
Yep.
submit your GST returns.
Mhm.
I mean, the government knows about me as a person without me having to file my taxes. Like, they could
Yeah.
file my taxes for me, no problem.
Mhm.
But that's not the system we have. It's like, you
Yep.
be honest with us.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way,
And
we
we'll tell you
actually
if you're
know
wrong.
everything.
Yeah.
So you lie to us. We're going to let you lie to us for 4 years, and we're going to audit you. We are going to drop the hammer down
Mhm.
on your last 4 years that we, by the way, kind of let you think you were getting
Yeah.
away with.
Yeah.
We're going to drop the hammer you down. We're going to charge you interest. And if you don't pay us, we're going to freeze your bank accounts. only organization out there that can freeze your bank accounts. It's the CRA.
Wow. Crazy, hey?
And, when people realize that they weren't unemployed to the degree that was required in CERB, because the government's going to know that. When, I said when people don't set aside their tax money, but what's going to happen too in the next little while, once this transition to EI happens, or when everybody that deferred their mortgage has to start paying it again, there's still a ton of uncertainty out there. And there's people that'll criticize the shutdown of the economy. I again need to recognize that I'm coming from a place of privilege here. I have the ability to work remotely. I've been working from home for 5 months now, with a reasonable expectation that will persist through January 2021. So recognizing that privilege, that I have not been impacted nearly to the extent that a lot of people have been. The government spent a lot of money on these support systems.
Yeah.
And it redefined what we feel is an acceptable level of debt to carry and to authorize. We're going to be paying for this for years and years and years and decades and decades. So we're in a hole here. Not to say that we should have done anything different. I think the reality is we're in a hole that we're going to need to figure out.
Yeah.
And I, again, happy I'm not the guy having to make that call, because I don't know what that looks like. I just know that we're going to be in for it for the next long time.
Yeah, definitely. And all that on the financial side, I agree with Justin. I think more so where I was saying I was disappointed, it was for about 4 weeks after it became apparent that this was a big deal, there was no restrictions on people flying back into the country from China. Like it was as much of you put on, there's those screens when you go through customs. It was just, have you visited the Wuhan province? Yes, no, nothing checked, anything. You just hit no and you go home, and no, nothing's checked. And I believe it was because we were scared of looking like we were going to be xenophobic if we didn't. And if you took any action, because you saw what happened when Trump closed the borders, he was attacked as being xenophobic. And then in retrospect, people said, oh, we didn't realize how serious this was. That probably was a good call in retrospect. But things like that. And then things about the response, like I had earlier said about, how they handled the rules and educating people about that. And I've still yet to hear about how you can, anything from, the government about how you can up your immune system and work on that. I still haven't heard any of that being shouted from the rooftops. You'd think that'd be the first thing that they would do. And but like you say, you have to have that compassion for everybody's. At the end of the day, you think of the government as this big, conglomerate, but it's just people at the end of the day, and they're doing the best they can, and not everyone has, the foresight, and there's all these different factors that you don't see going into it. So you have to give them a little bit of leeway. I was pretty disappointed with the messaging and just the, it seemed like what was coming out of the media was at times the opposite of what needed to be put out. It was just spreading fear instead of spreading knowledge that could curb the fear. And it seemed like they were just trying to do whatever they could to make people in such a frenzy of fear that they would never turn off their TV and they'd leave the news channel on all the time. And that was what upset me. It seemed very clear to me that there was areas where they could have done more to educate the public and take away from that fear. And instead they decided just to lean right into it. And that's kind of what worried me a little bit. But like you say, it's going to be a big, long recovery, and we're going to make it through, right? I was talking about this on the last podcast. Just the first thing I kept saying to all my employees and everyone that would listen, anyone that wanted to have a discussion about COVID, was I said, yes, it's going to be dark and it's going to be scary, but human ingenuity is an incredible thing. What we can come up with in terms of, changing businesses, adding plexiglass, getting new testing, like revolutionizing industry to fit what we need to do. It's going to be incredible what we see the response of. And I think we've already seen pieces of that, and there's going to be more to come, right? When you back humanity into a corner, it comes out swinging every time. And I think that's what I kept faith in as we went on. And I think as this persists month over month, that's what people continue to have to keep in the back of their mind, is just you may not be able to put your faith into your government. You may not be able to put your faith into a lot of things right now that you should, and there should be leadership for. But if nothing else, you can put your faith in humanity and what we can do as a people. And I think more conversations, like you said, of, coming from a place of compassion and care and wanting people to learn, that's what's going to help us build upon that, humanity. And the more we can interconnect and the more people we can get from different areas in different conversations. And I think there's a lot of pressure behind taking people out of conversations right now that shouldn't be in them. And I think we need to put just as much emphasis in spreading out these conversations and getting new eyes and fresh ideas in all these different areas, and really cross-pollinating and bringing people together. I see that as a better solution than trying to pull people apart and attack individuality. I think we need to lean into individuality and connect people together, right? You need to be as individualistic as you can, and also integrate that individualisticness into the whole, right? If everybody just follows the company line and does nothing, you don't make any progress. And if you can get everyone the freedom to just pursue their passions and follow what they want to do, the results will speak for themselves. So that's
Yeah, it's a crazy world out there, man. And all I can hope for is that we figure it out before February, because
yeah.
Marilyn and I have a little one coming into the world in
Oh.
February, and I can't, you you wanna be able to bring a child into the world and into a good, in good environment. And I mean, we've got a pandemic, we've got all this political garbage going
Mm-hmm.
on, we've got, it's just times are crazy, and trying to figure out how to navigate that whole
Mm-hmm.
thing is going to be interesting.
Mm-hmm. But I think this is a nice place to end it, Justin. It's just beautiful. When you texted me and told me that happy news a couple days ago, I was bouncing off the walls for probably 3 days. I love you and I love Marilyn, and I just think you are amazing people. And me and Courtney have been talking about you becoming a father for many years. I know that's kind of creepy, but I think she used to always tell me a story on 3K. Someone had brought their niece or nephew and was just a baby up and lived with the floor for about 2 weeks. And she said, watching you around children and just what an amazing job you did and what a special father you're going to be one day. And I just, just from being around you and what a good, decent human being you are and what values you hold, I just was so excited when I heard that. And I was just over the moon. And I think regardless of pandemics or economic uncertainty, all of that, what really matters at the end of the day and what has become more clear through all this craziness is just what effect good, loving parents can have on children, and what knock-on effects that have of bringing a good, moral, well-valued child into this world can do. It's more than any of us, right? You could work your whole life to bring change to the world, but you can do it with one child in a more expedient and better fashion right there, and they'll accomplish more than you ever could. And I just think that's beautiful, and I can't wait to see both of you as parents, and I just can't congratulate you enough, and I just so excited, and I wanted to talk to you about it more, but we just kept bullshitting more often. So I'll have you on in a couple months, maybe right before that, right before February, and see how you're building up to it and how scared you are, because I'm sure you're going to be shitting your pants, and then maybe a little after we can talk about the experience and how it changes you.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. It obviously means a lot to hear that coming from you. I think everybody likes to think that they'd be good parents, and obviously just hearing that is really special. So thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, times are crazy, but luckily, even after this baby's born, we still got a few months before they actually become a real human being, because
Yeah,
babies kind of just eat, sleep, and shit. So
yeah, just like
um,
you.
yeah, just like me. That's right.
Oh, fuck. Well, I can't think of a better way to end it than that, Justin. That's awesome. Thanks again for coming on, and I'm sure you'll be on many times in the future.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. Take care of yourself, eh?
All right, you too.
All right, take care. Bye.
All right, thanks everybody. A little bit of a long one here today, but I really enjoyed the conversation we had, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Like we say every time, if you have any feedback or anything you want to send my way, VonDubCast, or just VonDubCast at gmail.com, or either of the social medias. Like I said in the intro, if you see any areas that you think one or both of us have a blind spot and some knowledge we're missing, please reach out and help us out to better our own knowledge. We want to hear it and we want to get better. So, yeah, thanks for all of that. And I know it's a bit of a long one. Thanks for sticking all the way through if you're still here at the end. And start seeing you next week. I got lots of really good interviews coming. And if I can get them rolling in at the rate they are, we might be able to start releasing a couple in a week. So, yeah, if not later this week, then I'll see you guys next week. Thanks again.